So there's actually two added elements to this. One of them being the fact that I actually spoke to Vortix a couple of days ago, and he is in the middle of a move. So obviously, he
Okay.
may have not have had the time, or at least the ideal amount of time for him to practice. Obviously, moving isn't necessarily setting you up with ideal circumstances. Whereas on the other side, this is actually something that dates back to EGC Genesis. Going to an interview with Mista, is that Mista said he isn't really feeling comfortable in very long sets. He's not really a
Hmm.
professional player like, let's say, Vortix or let's say Viper or others. So, players that have years of experience playing 3-4 hour long sets. He specifically admitted that he's getting exhausted by like game 4, 5, 6. So, for him,
Ah.
maintaining that concentration by the end of the set is much more difficult than some of the counterparts that he's up against in these tournaments.
I'm glad you highlight that second detail. From out, I was like, wow, Mister's moved house a lot in the last few months. But that second detail explains it a little bit better. I can see where that's coming from. And that's a tough one. It's kind of weird because when you talk about team games in comparison, there's an experienced player on your team that might be able to help you through that. There's going to be coaches as well that can give you like tips on how to deal with that issue. But when you're, playing an RTS, you're a solo player, you're with a fairly small org. There isn't really that infrastructure that's going to teach you that. You have to learn it yourself, and that's definitely going to take time. So curious to see how long that's going to take for Mister, whether that he's actually kind of like honed in on that and start to fix that issue here. Because Vortex is definitely used to this. Vortex has been doing this for years. He's no stranger to the fatigue of long days of RTS action as we get into our final series of the day. Game number 1 now on your screen. Starting on Dry Arabia, we are going to have Mister in the red, manning England, and his opponent Vortex. Oh, he's in the blue, but he's playing as the black. He's going to be the Abbasid here on Dry Arabia. I'm already excited for this series.
I'm excited as well because we've been praising Mist as a great innovator, but also not to be underestimated is the fact that Vortix is also very good when it comes to coming up with build orders, and Vortix has an advantage that very few players have. That being a brother that's just as good as him, and really having a top 10 or 16 player as your brother who can be your practice partner all day, all night is just tremendously helpful here, really. So the fact that Vortix and Mist are brothers and being able to practice together is just immensely helpful for the careers of both here in Age of Empires 4.
Absolutely, and I have to say, like, I'd say Mister got the harder opponent of the two. That's no offense to Luciferon, but if you look at it statistically, I believe Vortix has earned a decent amount of cheddar more than his brother over the years. And Vortix, on average, has, I'd say, if we like skewed all the competitions together, I think he has been going slightly further overall than his bro. So this is definitely the harder of the two bros to match up. Yeah, in fact, if we look at the top 10 players, Vortix is fourth, and then Luciferon is seventh if you look at the esports tournament rankings. So this is a bigger challenge. If you want reference, Mister was actually ahead of Luciferon. He's in sixth. So he's definitely no pushover. But as you said, in these longer slogs, these very fatiguing sets, it could be the difference maker. So Mister definitely going to want to get off to the start with a win. The question is whether we're going to see an unorthodox build, something like the Horseman. I don't think if you go for that, it's going to be anything that catches Vortex off guard, though, because he would have definitely had a quick ganders at your previous games from yesterday. I feel like everyone by now would have heard about that Horseman opening against a Mongol player yesterday.
Vortex coming in with the House of Wisdom as we speak. He was one of those players that really revolutionized the way that Abbasids are played on open maps. He was the one sort of pioneering a 2000er Horseman style build. But against the English, especially in the hands of Mista, who is also well prepared for such scenarios, you gotta wonder if that's gonna be the approach that he's taking. We haven't talked about the maps here just yet, but that's an absolutely marvelous gold spot for Mista at the back of his base. He's also in a possession of a very, very nice forest on the right side that also helps him wall off the right to limit the surface area that he could be attacked from. And technically, he can also wall off the left side, sort of have his entire back secured over here. Vortix, somewhat
It's
similar
the
map
same.
for him.
Yeah, it's actually pretty much the same. I was just looking at Vortex straight away ahead of time because if he wants to go multi-TC, he can wall the left and the right quite comfortably, and you force that uncomfortable choke point. And we remember when we talk about England, what they're looking for in these dry Arabia spawns is they actually want like anything that's exploitable. They want a quick route from a gold vein to a food line. And while you do have that at the back of Vortex's base, the position you have to put yourself into to achieve access to that is incredibly dangerous for a slow static army, and you could easily find yourself enclosed and killed off in the blink of an eye.
Council Hall on the way as we speak over here for Mista. He's building that with 3 villagers. Other side, you have the economy wing, as one would expect from the Abbasids. Notably, it only takes now 145 to research it or build it, depending on how you approach this. But it is slightly faster than it used to be, making the Abbasids slightly more powerful in Arabia. But the big power, of course, comes from those berries, and you see that some of those berry bushes are already being depleted over here. So that's a tremendous amount of food already gathered by Vortix over here at the beginning of the game.
They're definitely greedy fellows. They quickly pick them apart. And it's kind of interesting, right? Like, Abbasids may be finally relevant on Dry Arabia. I mean, technically, like, it fits, right? You'd expect the Abbasids to be pretty good in Arabia. And we've been waiting a long time. It has to be said, you glimpsed onto it a little bit. Vortix has been doing this before this patch, before these changes. He was very comfortable playing as the Abbasids even a whole month ago. When you talk about, for example, the qualifiers for the big EGC tournaments, he got cozy with this a lot sooner than a lot of other players do, and he might have that extra layer of experience to just kind of wow us and impress us. I think while Mister might be tempted to throw a curveball with something like the Horseman again, I don't think it'll work this time around. I think he actually just has to execute a perfect England, and that might require him to go for a later timing because what we mentioned about these enclosures, the nature of the generation of the map, I'm not sure if it's going to be that easy to exploit that English Lombo timing to close out the game before Castle Age is on the table.
Vortex is up to Feudal Age, but no production building has been dropped just yet. He's very heavy on the lumberjacking department, having 9, and he's just now dropping a stable, so he's going to play Horseman over here. The big question mark right now is that Horseman is going to hold out against those longbows for some time, but once you have a mixture of longbows and spearmen, it's very difficult to fight against. For Mista, it looks like he's going to play very defensive, though. He's going for double mill farms. As we said, Mista is a big innovator, and not gonna lie, if Mista says this is something that he's confident in, I'm gonna believe that this is a good build, because in many cases he has shown us that some very unorthodox builds can work so well.
Yeah, and this is all about him prepping for the fact that he's up against Greedy Civ that might go multi-TC. I think he wants to give himself that scalability in the castle. Right now, you can see Mist is tapping a decent amount of gold. He put it down to 2 people, it was on 3 before. He might just cruise slowly towards castle, not even think about investing too much in blacksmith techs. It really depends on what he sees coming out from Vortix. And when he moves in with his scout and gets eyeballs on the fact there's only a stable showing at the front of the base, he might feel like he can actually be a little bit more greedy because you're already be counted out. The archery range investment now from Vortix, it does look like if you're Mista and you're getting eyeballs on this, your opponent isn't going to be rushing a secondary TC. The question is whether you can be greedy yourself or if you're going to have to actually be very present against an armed Abbasid force in the feudal age.
There is going to be a barracks being dropped over here to hold off those initial horsemen, but as you said, at this point, Mista is aware of both the archer range, the stable, and even the stone being mined, but he also sees that the stone miners weren't there in large numbers at the beginning and that mining camp was just recently placed, so he's aware that your opponent isn't rushing that second TC up, instead focusing a little bit more on the military department, as we do have a camel coming out at the beginning, one of the underappreciated elements of the Abbasid gameplay, being able to minimize the effect of enemy cavalry, but to me it just feels like Vortix might be expecting a sneaky horseman play from Mista.
Yeah, so this is interesting because realistically, like, it's not even about the horseman necessarily. It's the fact that something we haven't seen really attempted much with the changes to Abbassids, with their little slightly better timing, their little tweaked eco because they get more food on the berry bushes, is utilization of camel archers to counter out lombos. Archers en masse are good because they can just out-zerg, they're a little bit more cost-effective, and they can chase you down. But camel archers are even quicker, and they're even more tanky. 175 health on this unit. It moves at 1.62 tiles. You get about 1 volley out with the lombos before you get gap closed on. If you've got spearmen in the mixes, they're going to be cleaned up by the camel archers, and then the horsemen could just run through, hit the lombos while the camel archers assist. This is actually a really interesting sidestep, and it's something that even with the Abbassids on the rise, a lot of players haven't gotten used to when they try to play that regular comp as England of both spearmen and lombo.
Indeed,
And that's why there's a switch up.
That Camel Archer could be
God.
tremendously helpful against all of those spears, and it looks like we're gonna have a raid coming in from 2 directions. It is 1 villager being taken down, with the second one getting back to the town center for Mista here, taking down that horseman in return.
But there's another important detail here. Click on those racks and see what they're producing. It's not spears at all. Mista is throwing a curveball. He's going to be going for the man-at-arms. And this has fallen short and flat so often when I've watched England. I'm curious to know what the grand scheme plan is here, because against horsemen and camel archers, I don't necessarily see early man-at-arms being a great play.
I love this guy. Like, seriously. there's no way someone doesn't like Mista, how he plays. It's just like so out of the box and so unorthodox. As you said, it's gonna be interesting against Camel Archers though, because Camel Archers have a fairly good base attack, having 10 bow damage, so they actually pierce that armor, which is only 3 in Feudal Age, of the Men-at-Arms quite easy, and the Men-at-Arms are very, very expensive for a Feudal Age economy. The Men-at-Arms would actually work pretty well against Spearmen and Archers though, as we do have the second Townsend already up for Vortix. So as you said, it's a bit of a question mark how these Men-at-Arms would actually fare against the army of Vortix here. But also, not to be underestimated is the fact that if Vortix doesn't attack Mista, he would just stop making army and just boom, and I feel like Mista is just making these Men-at-Arms to make sure that those couple of units that are harassing him won't be able to do much.
Well, they've kind of already done much. That's like, what, second villager already sniped. He might get the horseman, but you're actually really comfortable with this situation if you're Vortix. Mr. has already revealed his man-at-arms. I'm pretty sure Vortix got eyeballs on it. And right now, the kind of awkward situation you find yourself in is like you're watching Mr. stand in his base, defend, lose villagers while this second TC goes on. I feel like Mr., because he went with this MAA and Vortix spotted it, he's put himself on the clock. And if Mr. doesn't actually put a dent into Vortix's base in the next 6, 7, maybe even 8 minutes, all of a sudden it just feels like you might as well be tapping out because the Abbasid economy is going to be way too stacked.
Indeed, looking at the villager department, it is right now 32 for Mista, 37 only for Vortix, so he's slowly pulling ahead in the villager department. But also, because Mista is not pushing him, he's able to secure a ton of map control for himself, so he's able to access those extra berries on the right side. He's also going to have the hunt nearby. So, part of the reason why this is a little concerning for Mista is because he has to start adding farms, which, while they work efficiently, his opponent doesn't even need to start adding those, and he's going to have just as good of a food eco based on the berries.
Yeah, my concern is if he gets to about 10 Camel Archers, which Vortix is going to do comfortably with the berries, just flirting him towards it, I don't feel like this comp does anything for Mista. In fact, you're going to see the problems he's run into. He's very static, moving away is hard. He'll regroup the Lombos, and that will scare away Vortix for the moment. But it takes you so long to arrive, and now he gets the heads up of what you're doing. So you can double down on this unit production. He gets to around, say, 7, 8 Camel Archers by the time you arrive. And this fight, all of a sudden, is incredibly scary for Mr. to try and take.
And the Camel Archers have just a gigantic amount of damage against the Spearmen. If you look at that, 10 bow damage plus 20 versus light melee infantry, so they are exceptionally useful when it comes to sniping down those spears. And the moment the spears disappear from the battlefield, the horsemen can take this. I feel like Mista is being baited into an absolutely terrible fight over here, because those Camel Archers will just snap down the spearmen in 5 seconds, and then the horsemen can just clean up the rest. He senses that there is trouble coming his way, but it's too late to react now.
Yeah, he's going to try and bait him in. Camel Archers, one's going to be traded out. Horsemen going to resume the charge in. Barely any spears here. Only one, in fact, and that means it's going to be very easy for Vortix to clean up. And if he needs to, he can peel away from those MMA in the blink of an eye. Lombos pushing forward, away from the Horsemen best they can, but the bonus damage of the Horsemen is making the difference. Camel Archers slowly being traded out. And although Mr. looks healthy on the count, he's losing the critical element. Once those Lombos are gone, he will be kited out to the extreme.
He's just now bringing in some new spearmen over here to try and renew this battle here, but with the majority of those longbows gone, this is going to be a difficult fight for him to have. Although it looks like he's just flooding more infantry across the map here. He's got double barracks worth of production, plus of course the council hall. And one thing that's problematic with those Camel Archers is replacing them once you lose them.
And he's reliant on this berry economy. So it's really important. If Mr. wants to win this, he needs to get rid of this eco pocket in the next 2.5 minutes. Otherwise, most of it's going to be depleted. Value is going to be returned. And if you look at Vortix's numbers right now, this was all meant to be a ruse, a distraction of aggression to cover him into castle. But now he has to double down to replenish the army. And while that's happening, Mr.'s able to get the initial battering ram down. Really cool play with the spears, by the way. He held them back on purpose. He timed it so that they'd be staggered to arrive in the fight when most of the Camel Archers are gone, allowing him to clean up the Horsemen. And Vortix, it really feels like he needs some sort of pivot, some transition, either doubling up the Archer count or changing over to a new unit type to counter this out. And it looks like it is going to be doubling up the military production now with 2 archery ranges and about to be 2 stables.
He needs that because if he wants to continue with Camel Archers, those take a ton of time to build. 35 seconds, so not only are they expensive, they also take a lot of time to build here. And Vortix, as he said, he's basing his entire food eco on berries right now. If he gets pushed away from the berries, he just won't have access to food and he won't be able to make those Camel Archers. Now he's going to lose the berries on the right side. He's got access to berries on the left though, but you get the feel that now that gold mine and in general that left side, or is going to be pushed very aggressively by Mista. He's got the ram going
It's
already.
Yeah, it's tough to get in. I like the call by Mister to not get rid of the outpost or the mill. He understands that like there's no value to be gained there. But now we see the weakness of England. Look what he's going to have to do. Draw a line, imagining where he has to run. He has to go south, then he has to go west across. If he wants to shut down this food economy, it takes him so long to get there. Meanwhile, Vortix can just run straight back for his base and go to the other side. And all of a sudden, you're England playing the Benny Hills game, and it is not a fun one. So instead, Mister will start to invest more heavily in the Rams and will likely look to breach the main base very quickly.
He needs to because he's falling behind in the villager department. But if he can force one decisive fight here, that could be massive. The spearmen are a little bit behind over here. But I think you want to just absorb the damage with all those longbows out there because you need to snipe down those camel archers first before sending in the spears.
Yeah, so Vortix was reluctant to take that fight. I think he actually could have done a lot of damage there, but I think he's getting paranoid about these man-at-arms. They do take a lifetime and a half to actually get rid of, and you don't want to sacrifice that influx of horsemen, especially when you don't know what's going on behind. Like Vortix, he has these scouts, but they actually haven't been maintaining vision of the trickle in the troops. If you look, you can see they're spread wide for counterattacks and flank attacks, but he doesn't know what troops are being pushed out by Mister at any given time.
And the man-at-arms are very tanky, as you said.
Oh my god. Okay, that should have been worse. But now it does get worse. He wraps around. The count is just too pitiful from Mister. He's going to lose the longbow this time. There's way too many horsemen here. The double stable play has enabled Vortix and unlocked his full potential as the cavalry will plow straight through the English army.
What a massacre it is, and really, the English just live and die with those spearmen being there or not being there on the battlefield. And as you said, Mista may have underestimated the size of Vortix's army, and really Vortix just adding that extra stable is just a tremendous boost to his military production. And suddenly, the horsemen will just swarm the entire battlefield. They do have the melee and the ranged defense upgrade as well, so they are fully upgraded for feudal age standards, and Mista is on a full retreat now. A couple of moments ago, Mista had an army of like 40, now it's down to 10, and his opponent has 22. Able to pursue those straggler forces as well.
And you get picked off as you run because everything's static, everything's slow to retreat. The horsemen wrapping in, looking onto the villagers and onto the archers to get rid of them quickly. Camel archers looking to clean up the spears, but the longbows are targeting them out. Vortix might have slightly jumped the gun, but he's still looking healthy here. It'll cost him a little bit more than it maybe should have, but he'll finally back off after confirming that Mister has little left in the chamber.
But behind this one, Vortix isn't really disappointed about losing those forces because one thing that he's doing is aging up to castle age with that culture wing. And on the other side, Mista is nowhere close to aging up. It looks like he just wants to go full feudal age, but his window is closing because soon the Abbasid player will be able to make his own men-at-arms, and that's just going to beat the feudal age men-at-arms from the English. And of course, they can start adding mangonels to the party immediately.
It's crazy when you consider that when you look at Vortix's eco numbers at 16 minutes, you might just consider that, oh, no, nice, he's got enough for castle. Why is he not going castle? Because as you said, he's already going castle. He's doubled up that sort of production requirement. And this is all because of the double TC play in conjunction with the berry gather rate. This is an insane booster to the Abbasids as well as the Delhi, and we're starting to see it clearly play out here. When you consider just how many horsemen and camel archers he built, the fact that he has this surplus economy at this stage in the game is incredible.
Man-at-arms being added by Vortix as we speak. He is still playing very, very defensive over here, just trying to hold those berries on the north. But Mista knows that he needs to push this one before the upgrades come in. But I don't think that he's got the critical mass to break through this one. It's 27 army against only 18. But those men-at-arms will be amplified in importance for Vortix. If he gets like 4 or 5 of those out, he's gonna have enough to hold off these forces with the support of the cavalry.
And this is looking pretty grim. I mean, the man-at-arms are coming out. He's going to see the trip racks. Mister moving in. Let's see if he can actually find some value at all. He's trying to drop the outpost, but the triple man-at-arms coming out in his face. I think he knows what's going to come next. He'll try to burn through the racks, but Mister, he's a smart cookie. He's seen this story written too often. If Abbasids reach castle and you are England, your game is done. And game one will be done in favor of Vortix.
What a game, because we had some massive swings. For a moment, it seemed like Mista's gonna be able to take this one because the military count just dropped so severely for Vortix. But in the end, he had that massive buffer behind as an eco, and while the army that he was making is extremely expensive, talk about the horsemen, talk about the camel archers, especially in the food department, as I said, the 2,000ers and the berry gathering allowed Mista, or allowed Vortix, to just go for that otherwise very expensive unit composition. And because Mista wasn't aggressive at the beginning, Vortix had the time to build up that eco and build up that army, because that's the key factor here. By the time Mist started moving out, it was already a little too late to fight off those forces. His opponent had a bunch of camel archers out, and those camel archers take 35 seconds each to make, so if you go very aggressive here with the English, you're likely going to encounter minimal camel archers on the battlefield, but giving time to the Abbassids, they'll be able to bring those numbers up. And once you have those, you can just snipe those spears so easily, allowing your horsemen to charge in.
Yeah, and the problem with England in this matchup, even after all the changes, even after the curveball that we saw Mr. throw yesterday, even after all these details you consider, at the heart of it, this matchup really hasn't changed as much as people think. The critical detail is, does Abbasids beat me to castle, right? If you're England, like that's all that matters. If Abbasids beat you to castle, the game is over. You can't even try to play a long feudal. It doesn't work simply because the moment they crack castle, they drop man at arms and then they instantly start building siege in the field. And it's such a big advantage for the Abbasids because England is so heavily in on feudal. They don't tend to prep for castle, and even if you arrive at the same time as the Abbasids in the castle, counter sieging is very difficult. Your lombos are pricey already. You're already wood reliant heavy, and then you have to find somewhere to get 300 wood for the siege workshop, and then plenty more to build the units. I think that's actually an important detail, and this is possibly the first time we're about to see it come into critical play because quite often at the moment the fixation with Abbasids when we do see them is usually around something like the horseman rush early on. But behind the power of what horsemen are in the current meta still lies that potency of building your siege in the field, and it's such a big advantage for Abbasid players to leverage. Vortix didn't need it in the end, but had that game gone on for an extra 5 minutes, it would have made it incredibly decisive in favor of the Abbasid players on Dry Arabia, which means we will open up with Vortix taking game one. But I don't think Mister's out of this at all. I think he's got plenty ahead of him. But one thing you did highlight that I have to bring back up because I think it's very important that we always keep an eye on this. Mister admitted himself he suffers from fatigue. He suffers from long series. And the morale hit as well as you start to lose games like this early on. If you can't find one game to bounce you back by the third game, this could very easily just turn into a stomp because that type of demoralization in combination with your issues around taking long series due to fatigue can completely blitz you by the fourth game.
Exactly. Looking at the home maps, Mista has Boulder Bay, Lipany, King of the Hill. I really love this combination because there is a little bit of everything over here. You have a slightly more open map, like Lipany, you have something that's a little more static, like King of the Hill, and you also have that hybrid slash water focused map, Boulder Bay. So he really has that variety element into his selections of maps, and this gives him a chance to just select whichever he feels most comfortable with. It's not like he has free open maps and he's like, okay, what do I do now? We do have a Rus mirror though, so if I had to predict, this is gotta be a Boulder Bay. A map that he actually loves to play. He's a big water player.
Yeah. So, I mean, like thinking in water play situations, if we do end up going across to Boulder Bay, it feels like it is just going to be a Roos on Roos clash. I think like the right now we talked about it a little bit earlier today. I think Boulder Bay has the potential once everything's balanced out to be the most hype map for an esports scene in Age of Empires 4 at all. But as it currently stands, it is probably the single most underwhelming map in the pool just because it simply comes down to who has more boats and who gets pushed off water. And that's something we're going to have to deal with here because, it is going to be that Roos on Roos situation again. It's just the new France, really. And I say that with a very depressing sounding voice because it is kind of sad to see. I was hoping Roos would be used for more in these tournaments, but when Boulder Bay is in the map pool, that's not the case. So I think we're 3 minutes out from beginning, and then probably an extra 5 minutes out from someone calling GG, right? I think that's usually how this map works.
Well, sometimes you get some engagements in Dark Age with those scouts out there, but as you said, Rus is now basically the go-to civilization for most players on Boulder Bay, simply because that's the most sort of risk-free approach. Like, you can gamble on the French, but if you end up losing your fishing eco just before you would start getting your hawks out, you're already on the back foot. So you gotta evaluate whether French is actually something that you want to pick here and sort of take the risk, especially because French is just such a popular open map civilization. And after the Rus Fast Castle was nerfed, the Rus is not so popular as an open map civilization anymore because horse archers are not so powerful. And yeah, you got the early knights and you got some nice things going for you, but probably most people prefer the French on open maps compared to Rus now.
Yeah, and I think like another big issue, just in general, the whole concept of like water hybrid maps, and especially border base suffers more so than almost any other map in the game. This is map generation. That detail defines the game. We can talk about like a broken generational land map, and yes, that can affect, but like it's way too easy to frequently get into these border bay games. And the first thing you have to do is you literally just like look at the water and see who doesn't have any deep fish close to where they start. And whoever doesn't have any deep water fish close to where they start, minus 15% chance of them winning. Actually, I'd say 20%, especially in this matchup. It's exactly the issue we saw earlier today. It was the only game, I believe, that Kazva took from Beastie. And that was the reason he took it, is because Beastie had an absolutely abhorrent start. He had to look elsewhere to drop a dock. That delayed him by an extra 20, 30, 40 seconds, whatever it was. And that meant the initial boats coming out pushed his opponent up into the feudal age quicker. And in a mirror matchup, especially when you're talking Roos on water, that is all it takes to decide everything.
And the thing is that part of the reason why Aros is so popular on this map is because, as you said, the position of that deep fish is something that influences your early game eco so much and your early game success in general. And whenever you have a less favorable deep fish, it's actually something that's less punishing for the roost because they don't have to go back to their dock to drop off the fish. So even if it's a little further away from the shoreline, you still won't be punished as much as you would be with any other civilization that has to bring
Yeah.
all those fish back to the dock.
And the problem is like that's a cool concept, but then once again, it's like in a mirror matchup, it's a difference, right? And that's the frustrating part. It's why I think it's why most people prefer non-mirror matchups, is because while you can talk about like how mirror matchups tell you who is the best at X or Y, because we have random maps, it doesn't actually tell you who's the best at any given thing. A lot of the time, it tells you who got a little bit more lucky in the spawn. And while there are clear outplays at the highest level, the bigger detail that decides these mirror matchups seems to quite often, especially with these water hybrid maps, just come down to who got the better seed. And that's kind of a depressing state. It really makes me question, like, moving forward long term, would it be better for the competitive scene for there to be fixed, symmetrical map designs so that both sides get the same start? And it might seem boring, but it gives something to perfect, something to optimize. You could change it over time, but ideally, what you create is an ecosystem where someone doesn't just get punished because they were unlucky. But you know what? Let's get into it. Let's find out who's going to be unlucky. Map number 2, ready to go. We are going to be coming here onto Boulder Bay. And as we said, it is going to be that Roost on Roost matchup. The first thing I'm checking straight away is, did anyone get screwed by deep water fish? And I kind of feel like Vortix got a little bit screwed here. You might notice a wood line in the way of some of the more desirable deep water fish locations.
That is indeed true, although if you look at the other side, there's only one reasonable deep fish to work with for Mista around the central part of the map. Most of them are situated on the right side, so, well, because of all these trees blocking a certain portion of the fishing possibilities for Vortix, but on the other side, Mista having way less deep fish to work with, I kind of get the feel that this is probably as balanced as you could get in the current state of the game. Up north is
Yeah.
Vortix playing as the blue, and down south we're gonna have Mista playing as the red in the Rus for both. And one thing that, well, is definitely detrimental for Vortix, that he's got the trees close to the shoreline, making it difficult to dock. Just look at how defendable his base is. I've never seen anything like this on this map. It's like basically Black Forest. It's unbelievable how well defendable his base is. There's basically no chance for Mista to put up any kind of land aggression. Now, it's unlikely that you would see land aggression here anyways, at the beginning at least, but this is just such a well defendable base.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like, wow, that's really good. And then you realize that most players actually don't care because they feel the game is over due to what happens on water. So even if they feel like they have a defensible location, they don't play into it. Because both players do actually have defendable locations. If you thought that Vortex was as good, have a look at Misters. There is literally a tiny, tiny way in on the shoreline. Nowhere else. You can't get past this tree line without cutting it down. So I feel
Yeah,
like
it's
Mister in a lot of ways got better off here, because the other detail, by the way, if you look to the right side of his shore, he's got a lot of deep water fish over here as well. There's a lot of good things for Mister in this map generation. I think the only downside is his gold line is a little bit far away, but usually that doesn't matter on Boulder Bay because you're not going to be harassed on land.
And we do have a bit of a scuffle here for the deer, of course. Players racing for the bounty. As things stand, Mist is at 125. Vortix is a slightly better start over here. 180 is his current count. Neither of the players have added a hunting cabin, as you would expect, because if you do, you'll have to delay your dock. So you just add the scouts from the town center. We do have just one scout here for Mister, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the difference maker. That's why he's behind, because Vortex ran one over to his side while gathering his own deer. One
yep.
interesting detail to actually think about now that I've looked at these wood lines longer is while Mister has this really defendable location, his wood surplus is limited. So I think Mister has to kind of be ahead in the first 10, 15. Otherwise, this game gets very hard to play because you can see it, right? He literally only has one wood line near his base, and Vortex has 1,000,001. I'm very good with maths, guys. There's 1,000,001 wood lines here.
Indeed. So, as you said, Mista can't really afford to just get stuck in his base because he's going to have to move out for resources. Also, notably, on the right side, that's where both of his gold mines are at. So, in the somewhat rare scenario of a landing, those gold mines could also be exposed quite a bit. Whereas for Vortix, once again, his base is just so well defendable no matter what happens. As things stand, we have 4 fishing ships for Vortex out already. Mista is currently at 3, just now finishing the 4th one, so he's a tiny bit behind compared to his opponent in the fishing ship department.
And also in the resource department by a much more noticeable margin, actually. Yeah, Vortex already has the tech up. That's why Mister was underway. I just didn't spot it.
Yep,
Yeah, so
Mista's up really fast.
I was gonna say, I was like, looking at those numbers, I'm like, is Mister drunk today? Like this makes more sense. Yeah, he's gonna be ahead. He's gonna get the tech up first, and this is the first tick box. Like, if you want to stomp your opponent with Roos on Roos, this is check 1. And it matters a lot more than people kind of give credit to, because the difference between, like, when you're French, you're like, oh, he's building a Hulk slightly quicker. In this situation, Mister has 4 boats he could potentially convert very quickly into Lodger attack ships that will be in position next to his opponent's base to be converted, and you can see 2 of them moving out now.
But he doesn't see where the dock is at. He's just now finding those ships on the left side. Vortex is actually sneaking 2 Lodya fishing ships around to try and get those converted. And the thing is that Mista was just a little off positioned. He could have started moving up a tiny bit faster so that he arrives just when the upgrades kick in.
But he knows. Mister, the scout, just got the eyeballs on this. So Vortex is going to lose a few of these fishing boats. He might even lose more. Mister, he's a little bit delayed on turning around the second attack ship, but it is moving across now. And conversions are going to come out. And you notice what he's doing. Like, a lot of players have started doing this. They're shifting all their boats. The reason is you want to hide which one you're upgrading so it doesn't get sniped out. And that's what's happening here. Vortex, the one on the north side of the formation, is the one upgrading. And it might get away with this. He's going to garrison a few, shift them out on the other side, but they are pinned against the dock and the land. Nowhere to run and hide. Another one of the boats is going to fall. And Mister can easily cruise away from this, happy with the lead that he's just built.
That's a tremendous amount of lead that he has just built, because those fishing ships die so easily to the Lodya attack ships. And now, as I said, Mista is already playing from an advantageous position here. Fishing ships are popped out to try and repair that attack ship, but Mista can now pull his forces back. And the magical thing about the Rus is that you can always reinforce depending on whether or not you need more ships here. In fact, for Mista, he needs to focus down those repairing fishing ships here and before he finishes off that combat vessel.
This is kind of all a distraction. Have a look at Mister's dock. He hasn't noticed this yet. It's slowly being burnt to the ground by the scouts, and Mister's not responding because he's so baited in by what's happening outside of Vortex's dock range. He'll finally retreat away. Aggression has been offset, but he definitely needs to deal with these scouts. He needs to do it quick. At any stage, he could have easily converted one of these fishing boats to deal with that problem. But instead, he's going to bring back 2 heavily injured attack ships. And I don't think... No, they're not even responding to this. Vortex is just slowly doing this for free, unnoticed.
Okay, now he's pulling the combat vessels. One problem here for Mista is that he wasn't able to finish off those heavily damaged combat vessels out there, and you get the feel that that's just so annoying out there. But he takes down 2 of those scouts, and now he's harassing that villager, preventing a potential second dock over here, whereas he himself is about to add the second dock. So, still, Mista is ahead. He's got 2 fishing ships working right now, as opposed to 2 as well from his opponent, but his combat ship numbers are just a lot better. It's 5 versus... well, it's gonna be 5 soon.
Yeah, Vortex is kind of all in. He can't rely on fishing anymore. He needs to win the sea, which is why he's investing everything. It really is an all-in moment. And it's just a case of whether you can out-micro and min-max. He draws one of his ships away just in the nick of time, chases through, pinches one from his opponent. Mista arriving with more of these fishing boats ready to convert into attack ships on the front. And Vortex min-maxing to the max as he drags back these ships moments before they'd be sunk and moves through to the east side, baiting Mista away from the injured ships entirely.
Absolutely beautiful play here for Vortix, and really that's the story so far, because Mista wasn't able to finish off those vessels, and suddenly that's a big win there for Vortix. Mista has 5 kills, 4 deaths, but we have to keep in mind that 2 of those ended up being the scouts, so in reality he actually lost more combat ships than his opponent did, and that's just very underwhelming at this point, because, as you see, Vortix is able to heal up all of his combat ships, and suddenly he's at 7, whereas Mista is only sitting at 5.
Yeah, but defending alone isn't going to win this for Vortix. This is good so far, and he did take a good skirmish in the mid area of the map, but he's never reaching his opponent's line. And Mister is playing very greedy. Trip dock situation, he could very quickly boom up, and Vortix hasn't really done the same. He's just been investing out of one dock. He hasn't prepped himself for trip dock situations at all. Instead, I wouldn't be surprised if he's thinking about maybe trying to be greedy and think about castle age, and that might be something that Mister can exploit.
Mista for now, as you said, triple docks. He's pretty much all in on that water, but with the Rus you can justify that because if you win the water, you can convert your combat ships back to fishing eco. Behind this one, there is no blacksmith for either player, but Vortix is just now adding that, and as a reminder, the blacksmith upgrades do affect these arrow ships, so whoever is gonna get that attack upgrade in is gonna have a quite decent edge on water, as now Mista is moving up with 9 vessels as opposed to what we have from Vortix, which is 8, but a night one is just now coming in, so Mista needs to wait a little bit more for reinforcements together.
And he can afford it, because the big difference here, if you're wondering why the hell it is that Mista can afford all these docks already, look on land. Like, if you quickly toggle between the two players, Vortix has 4 of those valuable potential woodcutters gathering food so he can keep pushing out villages at all times. When we look across at poor little Vortix, like I said, he's got 5 people here. Mista has 0 people working on land. Actually, I say that. I shifted 3 in now. That's surprising. Yeah, so he went all in the end with the fishing boats. But he had that initial lead, right? So he had more people working on wood, which is why he had the influx to be able to afford this.
Here we go, the big battle coming in the middle. Once again, Vortix trying to pull those ships back into the range of the dock over here, and he's doing a great job with that, but he's realizing that he's missing out on production now, and this could be Mista's window to do a ton of damage.
Vortix, he needs to min-max this, peel them back as best he can as he targets them down. And this passive heal is making a difference again. I don't feel like Mista is necessarily microing this correctly, but it might just be that the reinforcements are good enough. Up to 9 now for Mista. Vortix down to 6. He is going to grab him by the balls and squeeze. And Vortix is going to get very uncomfortable in the blink of an eye. Because now it doesn't even matter about min-max microing. All you have to do is click on a target and chase them because you have the number lead. And it feels like this game might just be decided very soon. Vortix unable to complete the secondary dock, relying on one and outnumbered on the waterfront already.
Mista needs to finish off those damaged combat vessels, though. There is no way that he actually has a retreat here before finishing off those ships. But it looks like he's actually going to pull some of his vessels back, and Vortix is holding this one with a smaller investment than what Mista had. Mista is all in on that water with triple docks, and Vortix is able to hold this one back with just 1 dock operational.
For the moment, but the problem is he's still not gaining ground. You can see Mista's pushing out more reinforcements much quicker. And Vortix, I feel like you're at your Teva's end here, right? Like that initial food lead, leading into the additional docks, has put you miles behind. He'll push out 2 villages now, but that is going to be the fleet sunk, and he will not even be able to complete the dock. After the boat is going to be sunk, the remaining ones will move in, deny the dock, and force the GG. Mista takes game 2.
What a game over here. Mista went all in, and Vortix was just missing production here. He was actually out-microing Mista on the water for a long time, but brute force numbers just dominated there for Mista. Like, if you look at the KD at the end, that was... let me check that for a moment. 16 to 14. But in reality, the key thing was that Mista just overrun his opponent on the water. He realized that, okay, I gotta go full water, and he did that. 3 docks worth of production, slowly outnumbering Vortix, and Vortix was close to finishing that second dock, but with that dock being denied, there was just no chance for recovery, because there was no way that Vortix gets back on water against that many combat ships out there.
No, I think, like, really it comes down to a little bit to the generation I was talking about. Really good play by Mista, but, like, honestly, if you go back and look at those initial fights, I think Vortix was more impressive, right? The peel back, the min-max efficiency, keeping so many boats alive. But in the end, it just seems like Mister slightly more efficient economy. It already looked a little bit dicey when he races towards the feudal and wins. And I think like the layout of this map, just getting that initial influx of food a bit quicker, getting your dock down, or like having access to building additional docks a little bit quicker, definitely gave him the lead. And it felt like Vortix, although he had a great effort in those initial fights, it's just a snowball factor from there because your opponent is going to out eco you. There's just something a lot more efficient about the layout of Mister's base. And I think I mentioned that at the beginning, right? Like the first 10 minutes is going to be very important for Mister because he actually has pretty condensed resources, a comfortable start, but like his woodline especially can run out quickly. So it was actually critical that Mister held strong on the water and took control in the first 15. Had this dragged out longer, we're looking at a game where Vortex could easily bounce back and maybe even look for a land assault and make you feel uncomfortable. But Vortex isn't willing to hang around with that. He understands the power of losing out on the Navy side. As soon as that's done with, on Boulder Bay, it's usually a done deal unless you're already 30 minutes into a game. And it does mean that we're already getting an interesting series here, the third one, as we are going to even it up now 1-1 apiece.
And now we're going to one of the home maps here from Vortix. So far, we had the Rus being used for both players, and we also have the Abbasids gone for Vortix, and Mista has lost access to his English, and that could actually hurt when we go to Altai, or if we go to Altai, because that's one of the maps available for Vortix. Although, if Mista wants to pull something out of the box here for Altai, lacking the English, the Chinese is not an impossible option for him, as weird as it sounds. Hillandale and Highview are the alternatives for Vortix alongside Altai to pick from.
Yeah, so like China is kind of the civ I'm expecting to be ignored just because I don't feel like people have had enough time to find like the new way since the heavy hits to not only like the ability to supervise your landmarks, but I think the bigger deal is the fact that their supervisor's bugged. And that's the biggest detail that I think is going to draw people away from them is that you lose a decent chunk of your efficiency. And in a lot of ways, they start to feel like kind of a worse Delhi, right? Like Delhi can't quite get the full speed you can. You'll still get a point 0.5 times modifier higher. But because instead of the supervisor working at 3 times the speed on a building, it's 2.5 times, you're not getting the full bang for buck. And while initially, like you can have some big influxes due to the supervising of buildings giving 20% additional drop off as well, your imperial officials are limited to 4. Delhi can build as many scholars as they've got military buildings to bank in. And, like everything else that was making them good is kind of weirdly dissipated overnight. I do think there's still some potential there. I do still think China's very strong. I think Palace Guard has been continuously underrated patch after patch. I just think like the 15 minutes right now with the bugs and with the changes hasn't been figured out yet by the high level players because they've been so busy getting used to the fact that Delhi and Abbasids are relevant again.
Yep, I agree with that. I think there is just too much risk involved picking Chinese, which raised the question of what exactly Mista would do going into Altai. Of course, French is an option there in theory. You could have Abbasids there as well. But
hmm
the only reason why I'm actually thinking about Chinese, at least to like with a 5% chance, is because of Mista being the one. It's like if there's
Ooh,
anyone that could pop a Chinese, I think that's him. I'm actually
I
going back
mean,
in his logs. He didn't play a single Altai game in this tournament so far, so I'm assuming that he's got something hidden there because if he hasn't played a single game on that map, he must have a hidden strategy that no one has seen from him before.
yeah, I mean, you say that. Like, actually, I could see Vortex being just as likely to play Chinese. This guy was one of the scariest Chinese players just like a month and a half ago. Like, I was looking to him to like learn the ins and outs. It's really formidable. I think another thing to consider on Altai, we might see a player playing HRE. I think HRE is incredibly, criminally underrated on Altai. It's a little bit risky because if you get screwed on the relic spawns, your game is very hard to play. But because of the like nature of the spawns, remember what we talked about in a previous series where you sometimes get pinned up against the wall? That can be detrimental to certain civs, but because HRE naturally plays a stacked economy, they can actually benefit from the fact that they have a natural defense to their back to pivot forward into their power spike timings with a deep feudal run or rush into castle. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see an HRE coming out. I'm not sure which player. Like I feel like I've seen more Vortex HRE. I don't know if Mister has been playing much HRE recently. It's hard to find out, as you say, he plays on Smurfs and he doesn't have as much time as other players to play. I'm trying to think like other civs available. Abbasids is kind of weird, but can work as well. I definitely think France is one of the most obvious ones. I would have said England for Mister if he hadn't already played it. But let's have a look. I'm gonna like hit into the observe now. How long we got? So just under 4 minutes to go. It looks like it's actually going to be France for Mister, and Vortex is going to be whipping out the HRE. So not too much that's surprising here. I feel like we weren't necessarily going to get a French on French mirror matchup. I don't think Vortix tends to favor France on anything but open field maps. So probably just going to save that for a little bit later on.
Now, I loved your evaluation, especially because I actually opened up some extra info about the game because I was listening to this and I was like, oh, the big brain, like derivation of all that thought process going behind the scenes of picking civilizations for Altai. I have some big news for you because as you see on the screen, it's French versus HRE, but
Uh huh.
this map is going to be high view and not Altai. So Vortix is picking Holy Roman Empire for high view. Talk about some surprising slash crazy selections.
Wow. Yeah, like that is a little bit more wacky. Once again, I think if anyone was going to do it, Vortix, he's this type of player. Like he plays very weird formats. He was playing Abbasid on Dry Arabia miles before anyone else was. He was picking China on. I think he was one of the first people to start innovating the idea of Black Forest China when that was really popular. And then also, he was one of the players that would happily whip out China on Boulder Bay as well. Like this guy tends to play a little bit off meta. And I would say, like playing High View with Holy Roman Empire can be seen as off meta, but I have seen it done by a few of the masters of HRE, people like Matisse, Hart, and like I think Vortex can fit into that as well. What they tend to do is they're not even looking to rush into castle. In fact, castle is a big fat bait for HRE. If you rush towards castle, you run into a plethora of issues because if you haven't established mid game control and feudal, you can't easily find the relics or safely go and grab them. So expect Vortex to play heavily into feudal timing as the HRE. I have on occasion on this map even seen the HRE players go for a Minework Palace just to get the tech ups quicker and look to go for a Ram Rush early. I don't expect that out of Vortex. I think Ark and Chapel can be too good, but he will have to have a staging point from which to buffer France back. And it should be highlighted that although HRE is very unorthodox here on High View, France is criminally overrated on High View. The lack of gold veins in safe reach means against high pressure early on, you can be starved out of the game before you even get online in feudal. And that is what I'm looking to see if Vortex can do.
And with that, we have just 1 minute left to go. I'm really curious how Vortex is going to utilize the HRE because this is a civilization that's just so powerful on these slower paced maps like Hillandale or Altai, for example, that most people use it there. But I think Holy Roman Empire is criminally underrated on open maps. I'm not saying it's one of the best civilizations out there, but it's also not a civilization that was extensively experimented with on such open maps. And that is something that could actually deliver us some very, very interesting approaches here by Vortex. It's a civilization with a super powerful economy and a great castle age cavalry play, so I'm curious to see how Vortex is going to use that. Only 30 seconds to go until game number 3.
Yeah, and like actually, like this one's gonna be pretty hype because another detail that we haven't even considered is that HRE players, especially the kings, the ones that like spend way too much time on it when they should be outside touching grass, they have started to understand that there's actually some cute plays around like outpost utilization because the discounts you get is the HRE, right? So you actually playing the stone early, you drop outpost, and on a map like High View, that can be incredibly oppressive, especially for a French player. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Vortex has got. It looks like it is time. We are ready to get underway with the third game to see who is going to get one up here and make it 2-1 as we get into High View with Vortex versus Mista.
Spawning in on the right side, you are going to have Vortex playing as the Holy Roman Empire in the blue, and to the left, you're going to have Mista playing as the red French. When was the last time where you saw Holy Roman Empire being picked on an open map?
Sorry, I thought you were going to say, when was the last time you saw France being red? But yours is probably a better question. Mine's just one of disgust. But here's a better question for you. When's the last time you saw an exact same map generation as one in a previous series? Because this is the exact same map from the Marine Lord Wham series between France and Delhi. Except France is on the southern side this time. Like it's an exact replica.
Yes and no. That's my answer to this.
Oh,
So,
actually, yeah. It's
so,
slightly different, but
so as a bit of a context, the players in the last round are actually playing on admin picked seats. Now, I can imagine two
ah,
things. A, the players were accidentally given the same seed by the admin because um, mistakes sometimes happen. But it's also possible that this wasn't a mistake, and hear me out why. So here's the deal. Whenever you're looking for a seat as a tournament host, this is usually done by tournament admin, you want to make sure that A, it's not bugged, B, it's something that's also relatively fair. Obviously, you can't make it perfectly fair because the best thing that you can do as an admin is sort of just generate seeds in within your own game. So you launch a private
Yeah.
game, generate the seed, look at the map. Obviously, this takes a lot of time. Like, you can't just generate 100,000 seeds and select the best ones. Like, you can go through like 20, 25 seeds. So it's possible that for whatever reason they didn't have the time or the ability to find another good seed for this map, and they just ended up giving the same seed to the players. Now you could say, but hey, these players might have already seen the previous set, but they don't know that they are playing on the same seed, so they'll have to explore the map just as much. And like, no one would actually anticipate playing on the exact same map that the previous set was played on.
That's understandable. I mean, admins, their time is very valuable. You know, they've got a balance looking at these maps versus, going to the club, getting drunk with the friends, getting all the girls. Admins, I mean, they're ballers. They've got too much to do. But no, like, in all seriousness, I think this might be slightly different, but a lot of it is the same. I mean, the things that kind of like pinged in my brain is the gold vein placement for the northern side. All of them are the exact same. The wood lines in the center with the sacred site in conjunction, the back of Mister's base, like there might be some changes on the east and the west side of the map, but the centralized area is basically a replica. Interesting to give that insight, but like thinking of that in terms of who benefits more, like the way we've seen this played out towards sacred sites doesn't matter as much in this matchup. The natural defenses could
Excuse me.
be beneficial though.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Mista is coming in with a spearman rush over here.
Oh my
Talk
god.
about the aggression with the French. It's like we were just casually talking about the map because, French just playing that standard fuel age, but we haven't even talked about the fact that Mista is changing things up and he's opening up with the spearman against the HRE and he's dropping the tower as we speak.
Yeah, he's sneaking in. Scouts are spotting out the layout on the west and the east and south side, so he'll know that it's not beneficial from that side. So really, this is the only angle approach, and he needs to be denied. The villager's moving out, but that baby shiv is not going to be very effective. Oh, Vortix, the curse of playing HRE. You just want to be a fat, chunky, greedy boy, and this is the price you can pay. The good news, at least, is Ark and Chapel's almost complete. Mister has delayed his own tech-up timing by doing this, by a considerable margin. The question is, what can Vortix now do to counter this with that age advantage?
And I think the big thing is that Vortix will be cut off from gold, which means one of the key elements of a feudal age gameplay from the HRE, the men-at-arms, will be removed from the equation, or at least it will mostly be removed because there is some gold for Vortix to make a couple of men-at-arms with. And Mista is actually shifting towards stones. It's likely going to be a feudal age into a second town center type of play, which seems quite reasonable against the Holy Roman Empire that wants to play with infantry. It seems Vortix dropping a barracks on the right side as we speak.
I think the big thing, though, for him with the stone is probably the outpost spam, right? So he wants the arrow slits. If he puts more people on, TC is definitely feasible,
Yep.
but I think in this situation, it's just about him spamming arrows from those towers and being
True.
even more of a little bugger
True.
than he already is.
I anticipated him to send more villagers on the stone, but indeed there is only just one villager mining stone. The tricky thing there, of course, is that you have to invest into that mining camp in order to actually get the stone that you need. And, just mining 50 stone and making a mining camp is a little painful. But with the French, you have discount on your drop-off buildings, so it's much easier to pull this off than it is with other civilizations.
And the other thing to highlight is Mister's a very big brain player. I think he's very tuned to these kind of frustrating details of the game. As you get all these arrow slits out, I think he's probably been bullied by a bunch of Mongols that done outpost spams. We all have, right? But the highest level players, something they clock onto that a lot of other players don't, is what's important about those outpost spams. It's not just the oppression, it's the fact that when you upgrade them all with arrow slits and they're firing one damage at all these structures, those pings are going off everywhere. It's distractions, right? It's all this anarchy on your screen as the defensive player that you have to respond to, and it's very easy to miss your villagers being aggressed onto and being sniped out in the meantime. But nice move out by Vortix. With the villagers to the north, before arrow slits can even come to the equation because Mist is still waiting for his tech up, Vortix is going to remove the problem at its root.
That's a great move indeed. Mista doesn't have a fast-moving army, so he was off position over here and he won't be able to reach that tower in time. He's also pulling a villager to wall in the right side, so he doesn't even want his opponent to get out of there, and honestly, that's a great idea, because this way he's limiting the movement area of Vortix, and it also secures the right side of this outpost, making it much more difficult for Vortix to just flank around and take that tower down while he's focusing on the left.
Yeah, this is a smart cookie moment, right? It's like, oh, you want to play the north? Okay, but you can't have the south anymore. Like, you can't have your
Look at the
cake and eat
walls.
it here.
Look at that second set of walls out there. That wall is going to secure something else. A tower in between those walls that's virtually impossible to be destroyed by Vortix, and that is something that's just going to deny a tremendous amount of food.
But right now, that's not what his fixation
Uh,
is on. He understands because look, he's trying to
what?
cut through. He gets through. I was waiting to see, and he does. He gets the tree down and instantly floods out with the man at arms.
Oh,
Oh, this is always funny to watch. This is why this cheeky walling is to a certain degree balanced, folks, is because whenever you try it, someone, if they've got a villager nearby, can really take a whiz on your parade just by chopping down a single tree.
Vortix was the one that pioneered this sort of chop down the tree and push into the opponent base through the walls type of scenario. I think he had a Boulder Bay game where he pulled this one off, and it came as a massive surprise to his opponent in that game. So, as you
Yep.
said,
I've
with that, the infantry can now once again leave. Another tower is attempted by Mista. He now has the arrow slits equipped on that first tower, but now he's got some knights moving in, and since his opponent only has men-at-arms, those knights could actually be quite effective in this battle.
He's got a few spears in there as well, but obviously it's annoying for these squishy units to dive the outposts. That's a little bit of a concern. But man-arms, they're done with this. Screw these villagers. They're going to turn around and deal with the spears for the moment. Knight is going to be forced to run away, so you can't fight in the skirmish, but didn't really manage to snipe that villager in the end. Able to easily garrison, and that's the nice thing I like that Mista's doing here. A lot of people get really greedy with their outpost placement, like, oh, I need to min-max the distance so he can't move out of this area. Instead, Mista's like, I know it's expensive, but if I condense these together, they're all going to be armed with arrows, eventually firing off, and it means that I can keep sneaking a villager out with little oversight and little risk of it being assassinated.
But here's the deal. Mista did minimal damage to his opponent, and with that gold mine accessible for Vortix and the Alchemy Chapel boosting the berry, the sheep, and the gold villagers, Castle Age is within reach for Vortix. And that's the brutal thing about HRE. That's why I said that this civilization is very underappreciated for open maps, because if you can't pressure them early on, their eco is so powerful that they will just beat you to Castle Age. Mista was putting up a ton of pressure on Vortix's base, yet you're still going to see like a 930 Castle Age here.
Exactly, and he's delayed himself this whole while, right? And even more outposts being invested in. This is kind of why HRE have been lackluster on open maps, is because of this outpost rushing. But it was so smart by Vortix to assassinate that single tower to the north, realizing Mista has stretched his resources when he showed the south. That opens up everything that happened since then. This snowball anarchy that ensures that Mista can't actually box his opponent in. And even if you do eventually box him in now, he's going to be very comfortable because he's going to crack Castle Age, he's going to have his own knights coming out that are better than your own, and he'll also have some juiced up infantry that will be able to plow straight through anything you throw at him.
And look at the south. There is one man-at-arms sent forward by Vortix. He had a scout nearby to see those villagers moving out for hunt, and that one man-at-arms will force away Mista from those hunts. Once again, just an added level of frustration. Mista is now on stone with quite a few villagers out there, so we'll have to see if all of that stone will be spent on arrow slits, but even if it is, now with Castle Age, you can just get siege weapons out here, or you can just start getting those man-at-arms going, and with all the upgrades coming in for them, the towers with arrow slits won't do that much damage against heavily armored infantry like that.
No, and the whole purpose of all these outpost spams, you can hear it on your screen right now, ding, 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 as all these attacks go off. That is the idea. It's meant to distract, but in this situation, it's not distracting to set up anything for Mista. Vortix is very comfortable. Although there is this superficial pressure of all these outposts, it's not felt internally. He's reached the castle age, like you mentioned. He's very comfortable. He's going to have to shift over now because he ran out of barriers to extract through. But overall, it's very easy for him to now buffer his opponent away from his base because he's going to have these tech top units with the upgraded man-at-arms coming out now.
He needs to soon fight here because there is some archers being mixed in by Mista. He already lost one prelate trying to go for that relic on the north, and he's moving out just now. Looks like the knight is gonna be sent forward though, so you gotta be careful losing that prelate because there's a scout there for Mista, and he's just playing this one so smart. He's about to snipe a second prelate over here.
Yeah, Vortix is going to get the bad news. He arrives at Relic's like, oh no, that's not good. Maybe if he instantly wall lulls, he can catch him off guard, but Mista's not looking quick enough. He's distracted by the main fight. The main fight that is actually going his way. The MAAs are slowly being pierced through by the assistance of the outpost. Wallow buys some time. They try to snipe him down, and they will get through him in time. Just about. Second prelate now here is also going to be snitched on. He's going to chase him down. That's going to be 200 gold sunk, and that means that Vortix has to pull back and defend this prelate. He needs to get one banked quickly. He's missing out on so much passive gold every second that passes without having any relics banked.
And he's also losing a ton of gold invested into those prelates. That scout is insanely helpful here for Mista, because that's the scout that allows him to spot that prelate in that forest. And you see the archers will once again try to target the prelate out here. Another volley comes out, and that prelate is soon gonna be history as well. Slowly the forces of Mista are being ground down, but there are just so many religious units over here going down. At least now the scout is gone, so it's gonna be a little more difficult for Mista to spot those prelates hiding in there. And well, this all looked great for Mista. The problem is that he's still stuck in Feudal Age. He ran out of berries entirely as well, so he managed to slow down his opponent. The question is he gonna be able to stop him entirely? And I think the answer is no.
Yeah, and the concerning part is how trivial that was for the man-at-arms to clean that up. Weird kind of thing with the... I don't know why Mr. has a villager out here chopping wood. That is going to die. I don't know, I just like highlighting the weird anarchy that occurs in these situations. I feel like Mr. is kind of lost all of a sudden. When he takes that fight like that and he sees it's such an emphatic victory for Vortix, he has to understand that he's on the clock now. And it won't take very long for Vortix to escalate into an aggressive force sieging across the map. And when you think about Mr. and the way he's positioned his base, all of his military district is on the front. He can actually be exploited very easily. Mr.'s in a wonky situation now. You can see he's dropping a marketplace, probably trying to prep himself for rushing into castle as quick as possible, because he was extracting a lot of stone that is now wasted product. The best thing he can do is sell that stone, try to get a quicker timing castle, and hope to God that Vortix isn't going to be overwhelming him with these powerful man-at-arms by the time he reaches it.
But yeah, as you said, that's just a hope at this point, because the man-at-arms are increasing in numbers. There is already one relic in the Regnitz Cathedral. The second relic is about to get picked up on the right side. There's a knight lurking around, but it looks like he's actually going to miss that prelate. That is where the lack of line of sight for a knight actually backfires, and once that prelate gets back to that stealth forest, the knight has just no line of sight on this, and Vortix is also aware of that knight being there, so that prelate is likely getting back home, and that amount of passive gold income for Vortix is going to start skyrocketing his eco.
It's incredibly impressive. I mean, you can talk about the eco lead that Mr. has, 10 villages up over Vortix, but it almost just feels artificial when you then add in 2 of these relics. Remember my maths. I know, my maths is usually bad, but this situation is a nice one. Think of every villager providing 40 gold per minute, and, well, then you can do the simple maths of what 2 relics provides. You're essentially getting yourself 15 villagers worth of income per minute with just 2 of these relics banked. And it evens up the difference. And then you have to add into the fact that, of course, as the HRE, you've got that Holy Inspiration buff, which makes you more efficient. But what is this? What? Okay, this is cool. Vortix is actually going to bank the relic in the outpost to juice it up so that you can take out targets. Or, no? Okay, no, it's not even that. It's just the weirdest misclick we've seen this series so far, as it seems he accidentally dragged the prelate over here with the spearman. Oh, no.
That's a disaster.
Oh,
That's an absolute
no.
disaster. He might just throw away a relic over here. What is he doing?
Oh, no. I don't think he was going for a new relic. He didn't realize he never banked it. Oh, my God. Oh, no.
He can be very happy that he actually managed to save that prelate, because he could have actually lost that relic. I was thinking about this next relic, and I was like, that's not sure that he can grab that. If he takes that relic out there and loses it, there is no chance that he will never recover that. So he can be very grateful that he got away with that. Garrisoning relics into towers or castles is actually a relevant thing, especially after you have your Regnitz Cathedral full. But in this scenario, obviously, Regnitz Cathedral takes priority, so that was just a misclick.
Most definitely. Like, I thought maybe some sort of weird twist. Vortix knows some we don't. No, just watch him. Like, nope, you made me look like an idiot, and now you look like an idiot. With Vortix, we look like fools at this stage. But luckily, he does bank it in the end. Mr. has bought enough time to arrive in the castle now, and he is starting to pressure in. The archers are moving past the outpost and looking to dive deep. But with the man-at-arms here, Mr. needs to be careful. The only good news for him right now is he's MAA, a little bit slow to gap close, but it doesn't take them long at all now that they have marching drills, and when they get in charge range, they go up to 1.5 movement speed.
And a big thing is that those man-at-arms are on the right side. Those are heading towards the base of Mista, because there was quite a lot of villagers lost here for Vortix. He's down to 39 as opposed to 54. But as you said, those archers are being repelled by the men-at-arms. The prelate will be sniped by the archers in return. But this counterattack for Vortix is just life-saving almost, because he really is on the back foot with all those towers in his face, and now Mista in Castle Age, but those man-at-arms are just here to slaughter everything.
But there's Arbitrators. That might be a problem.
Is there enough, though?
Quickly.
Is
The
there
problem is
enough?
the Arbitrators, though, they're getting under the TC, and the split up from Vortix, he feels like he can't stick on top, but he's been picked apart one by one, and the damage is already being done. Instead, he splits off a contingent and sends him straight into the eco lines, understanding he's going to have to sacrifice a bunch of these MAAs just to keep the crossbows at bay, and he might be able to strike deep into the village account, but Mista quick to peel them back and garrison them inside the TC.
That's a terrible fight for Vortix. He killed like 1 or 2 villagers here, and as I said, those Arbaleths are doing a lot of work over here, partly because they do have a great mobility here. You're just running around and just taking shots as you retreat. As I said, the Town Center Fire is helping here a lot. Arbaleths are fairly fragile, so when the men-at-arms can close the distance, they will just slaughter them. But as long as the distance is there in between the man-at-arms and the Arbaleths, they will just take some great engagements, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Vortix's forces are being ground down to oblivion here, although the archers and some villagers on the wood line will still get cleaned up. So I guess one accomplishment here for Vortix is that he was able to give himself room to clean up the towers in front of his base and secure the relics.
He did close the distance as well, right? If you look at the eco count now, there's just 12 between them. So it was somewhat of a dent. It did slow down the production rates, which does hurt Mista because he just teched up, right? So he's just invested this huge influx of resources. He wants to use these resources to build new units, but of course you need to keep that churn going. And because you got delayed on the wood line, you got delayed in the gold line, that means like the Arbiter, Trickle Out, Knights, whatever you're going for is going to be slowed down a bit. Vortix right now needs to solve a few problems in his base still. Like, he hasn't really ramped up. Instead, he's going to sidestep and try to go into Siege now. You see the Siege Workshop at the back producing the Mangonel. After he sees the investment in Arbitrators, this is a really good heads-up play. Curious to see if Mista's going to be wise to what he can do in the middle of these fights with the Arbitrators. If you do get caught out by the Mangonel, if you drop the Pavises quickly, you will get that ranged armor initially, and then you can quickly move between the bursts. It's something that I haven't really seen a lot of French players utilize in any situation, despite so many opportunities for Pavise to be game-changing.
Yeah, in general, Pavisa is not frequently used as the first Arbaletrier make it to the battlefield. 2 towers stay up, so you couldn't set the second tower on fire before the Arbaletrier arrived. But as you see, the first Mangonel is on the way. We're gonna have some Arbaletrier being sent to the far right as well, as the Sacred Site was capped as well by Vortix to try and neutralize that. At this point, those Arbaletrier numbers are concerning, but once you get a couple of Mangonels going suddenly, those will be very heavily exposed over here. One thing that's interesting is that Vortix hasn't gotten the 200 weapons upgrade, and I'm not sure if he knows that the bug related to 200 weapons and maces was fixed. So now the two don't override each other. You can actually grab both of those upgrades at the same time, and against Arbaletrier in particular, which is not a heavy infantry type of a unit, the extra 2 base attack for 200 weapons is actually more impactful than the maces having +6 against heavy infantry.
Yeah, and he definitely has a surplus resources to go for it and a justification of enough man-at-arms, but kind of weird that he's avoiding it. I mean, I don't think it's going to be the game changer right now. For me, it's kind of a case of like, the Mangonels are going to be the do or die by which you win or lose this. He has got 2 of them now, and I think the cool thing about Mangonel is that has been underrated for a long time, and people have slowly more woken up to is the fact that they're actually great at getting rid of buildings. Like, they burst them down quite fast. And the man-at-arms moving in as well, these outposts that have been oppressing Vortix for so long are about to be removed from the map. And it's very hard for Mista to now defend this, seeing these 2 Mangonels in play. He just has to back up and forfeit a lot of this ground away.
But as he's doing it, he's also picking off 6-7 villagers on the right side on that gold mine. That is just a ton of damage being done. Vortix was a little slow to react, and now he's scrambling for walls. It's not even just the Arbaletrier, there's the archers being mixed in here is so helpful, because the Arbaletrier fire too slowly, but if you add the archers, they'll be able to start picking off villagers. And also worth noting is the fact that Vortix is only on 2 relics, not 3, so his eco is slowly being ground down here by a superior and superior force of Mista, who is about to jump on those Mangonels.
Vortix! Oh my god, where are they going? Other than to being a pile of rubble. One of them already gone. Shot comes out. Decent damage, but that is not the value found. And the man-at-arms, when he ran straight through, as they turn tail and run, they'll be picked apart by the Arbitrators. If things were looking grim on the east front, they're looking even worse on the west, as Vortix is quickly losing any ground he would have gained.
Yeah, I think falling at this point, Vortix is falling apart in the execution department. Many things just going really badly, and just look at how many villagers are stranded on the north. If that ever gets discovered by Mista, that's game over.
He has to take the gambles at this stage, running out of places that even feel safe, even in his own base. And you have to question, Vortix, what's going on in this series? First, the Prelate play, now the Mangonels. These whoopsie daisies are going to be daisies all up for him, as there's going to be a nice bouquet wherever he gets buried at this rate, because Mr. is quickly taking control of this game.
And he's about to spot those villagers up north. He's got the scouts, he spotted them, and there is just one knight over there, but I think if he plays this smart, he's going to send his entire army over there. Because one knight might not be able to do a ton of damage, but if you send in some more archers in here, this is going to be a game-ending fight, I believe. That's just way too many villagers going down.
Or you just scout zerg, right? He's just scout zerging. Look how many scouts, 13 scouts. Because he understands he doesn't have to kill the villagers. He just has to stop them working. Man-at-arms trying to move across. Scouts rushing in. He didn't want to build siege workshops, so this is why he invests. Because he knows he can burst through these Mangonels very quickly, but he needs to cluster them up and move them in. One Mangonel, one round of burst should get rid of it, but the repairs coming out. The villagers save the day. Arbalatriers kept at bay. Mangonel will stay alive, but the second one is exposed. The scouts move in, and they will get through it. And they will back away before they take any major casualties to the second contingent. And that is a heavy loss for Vortix in a situation where he hasn't got much left to give.
And the lumberjacks are being completely denied. On the right side, those arbaletiers and archers keep coming back. And if you look at the army numbers, it is just growing so rapidly for Mista, 56 over 30. And there's also 20 villagers lead. Plus, of course, you have all the map control for Mista, so he can operate with all those gold mines. He can operate with the hunts, the boars. And that is a tremendous advantage over an opponent that needs to start investing into farms. Stable is not being added by Vortix, but I mean, unless it's horsemen, it's not gonna do much. Knights will just die to the arbaletier just as much as the men-at-arms will.
I think, it has to be horsemen in the situation. That's probably the play. It's going to be a trip stable drop. The problem is Vortix is budgeting himself, and he's running out of budget, right? Because the limitation for him as HRE, and this is where Highview gets really dicey a lot of time for HRE, it's not even your resources. It's your territory. A lot of this room is not safe anymore, right? You don't want to be anywhere in these stealth forests. You've already had to fight over the front of your base. It means he's running out of places to drop the farms you were talking about, which he needs desperately, and also military buildings. Meanwhile, when you look at Mista, what's the scare factor here? What does he care about? He can just expand in every direction and be comfortable because Vortix is never able to push it to the metal because even if he gets out of his base, he's running a very slow static army of siege and man-at-arms.
And those lumberjacks up north are still very heavily exposed out there. Looking at the Vortix, indeed, he is coming in with the horsemen. He could still force a decisive fight here if he has a sufficient amount of horsemen jumping on all those arbaletiers, but he needs to wait with this fight.
He needs to protect his Mangonels. Mangonels going for the shots on the arbaletiers! Good damage, half the army gone! Scouts sticking on top of it, trying to get through him and burst through one Mangonel, going for the second one, but the repairs are coming out! And Mista is quickly losing the edge that he had here as half of his arbaletiers are just disappearing in the face of so many rocks falling from the skies. 2 Mangonels will survive, all the scouts will die, and Vortix all of a sudden looking alive again.
Yeah, he needed that one decisive fight because at this point, Mista's army is still looking scary, but it's such a one-dimensional army. Basically heavily relying on the arbaletier, and we've talked about this multiple times. In this game, single unit armies don't work. You need to have a composition, and that composition is appearing on the battlefield for Vortix, being veteran horsemen, men-at-arms, and mangonels.
I mean, the power of Pew Pew did compel us in previous metas, especially the Horse Archer one, but these days, it is the power of Splat. That's exactly how I define this. These Mangonels are just stringing Mista up and tearing him apart. And as you said, he needs some sort of transition. And as we know, transitions leave you fragile. But instead, Mista is stubbornly doubling down. Once again, renewing the scout count, doubling up on the arbaletiers. But now it is horsemen. Vortix is the one to make the transition under pressure and will be able to move out as a result of this.
And once the horsemen are there, they will be able to deal with those scouts. Mista's adding a ton of scouts, he's got 19, and the reason why he's doing it is because these guys do have a decent amount of torch damage and they're very cheap. They're much cheaper than horsemen. In the new patch, horsemen might actually be more legitimate though, because they also add a lot of combat value to your army, whereas these guys are only good at sniping siege and that's it. And even without the siege now, the horsemen will just deal with the arbaletier.
But the Mangonels are just making this trivial. He's going to move in. The repairs coming out. Vortix sacrificing Eco to keep his siege alive because that's how he's going to win the game. Moving in by the horsemen onto the arbaletiers. Man-at-arms to scare away the scouts. All the Mangonels are down, but the horsemen are in on the arbaletiers. Man-at-arms are arriving to assist as well, but Vortix has to back away. Mista has gained more ground.
he needs to just wait a little bit more for a horseman to arrive. He's like 15 horsemen away from winning this game, I believe, because now the siege is irrelevant for Vortix, because he's got the tools to deal with those archers. He needed that siege before because he didn't have the horsemen to deal with all the arbaletieri and the archers, but now he's got the tools. He just needs to mass that cavalry and jump on those archers. Behind this one, we have to keep in mind that Vortix is just pinned inside his base, down 20 villagers. He's got 3 relics in the Ragnitz Cathedral, though he's secured 1 more. So that's going to be a tremendous amount of extra gold to work with. And I'm seeing a veteran spearman come in here by Vortix. Looks like he's going to start adding some spears against those future scouts from Mista. Whereas for Mista, it looks like he is not even making any more units out here. What is he up to?
Taking a coffee break, maybe? I don't know, this is a bit of a funky one. He was just now setting up a new gold line. You can see he's moving to the center of the map with 26 villages. But that was actually really well played. Vortix, it looks like it's just a weird fight, but because of that prelate, he was sneaking out in the middle of that fight. That's where that relic came from. And although you sacrificed the mangonels, now because you have a 3rd relic in, not only will you be able to afford these horsemen indefinitely, but now you'll be able to keep replacing the mangonels. And that is a switch up that Mista has still not addressed this whole time. Look at his base. There's no anti-siege. There's no siege of his own. He's stuck with this composition, stubbornly refusing to switch over. And we know what happens to stubborn players in this situation. This isn't release patch. This isn't build one unit type and win the game. This is transition, transition, transition. Build a composition that will win you the game. And that is where Vortix is turning out to be miles ahead of Mista.
And indeed, Mista is missing out on so many opportunities. He's got the sacred size that could be captured by him, just so that he's forcing his opponent out of his base, or just at least leveraging that map control. Relics were not picked up at all. There's still 2 relics out there. And Vortix, he's given time to recover over here, as he's moving to the right side with the horseman. Is he gonna spot those gold miners? The answer is maybe. Yes, he sees the mining camp.
Yeah, he sees one running out. He saw the freshie on the line. And that's going to force a full retreat. Now, the good news for Mr. at least is he did drop a 4th Siege Workshop, so he might prep some sort of attack, but it is reliant on him securing this gold vein. And because he didn't protect it, because he played greedy eco-pocket France, now he might be punished. In the meantime, Vortix going deeper, diving past the TC, looking for the economy, but it's all spread out now. Mr. isn't in his base anymore. He's shifted onto these mills near the tree lines. He's moving into the central trees, but that means that he's more easily exposed and exploitable by Vortix at the same time.
Yeah, the thing is that those horsemen should have just stuck around on that gold mine, but maybe he didn't think there was this many gold miners out there, and he was just hoping to hit the food eco. Didn't really materialize, and now we got some scouts moving all the way to the north here by Mista. He probably is just planning to burn through those walls at some point, open it up, and then sort of act as a distraction as he's pushing the middle. Now Springolds are crawling up, also dropping a couple of towers with fortifications on them.
Here we go. Scouts creating the distraction. The west side, Springolds are starting to be built up, but it's also covering the outpost crawl as Mista is continuing to re-establish control of that area he once owned with 3 of these outposts. In the meantime, Vortix does return with a few horsemen. This is a good frustrating distraction. Sniping out these villages, they do at least have textiles, which means they take longer to get through. But slowly but surely, Mista is seeing big dents in his eco. When we look at the count, Mista at 85, Vortix at 65. Despite the pressure, he keeps offsetting it. And after they burst through the palisade walls to the east, the spearmen are waiting for them and will deter and buffer away those scouts once again.
Now, looking at Mista's resource bank, he could actually change up his approach over here because he's actually getting close to piling up resources sufficient for Imperial Age. And given the fact that he's really not getting pushed hard by Vortix, he could actually use that Imperial Age power spike and just get to Imperial, get the Elite Arbaletieri upgrade, and maybe mix in some hand cannoneers. A lot of opportunities would open up with Imperial Age here for a French player. Bombards, potentially Royal Culverins, depending on what buildings he is up with, or maybe even just the Red Palace forward.
The only thing red right now is the amount of French blood being spilled. A bunch of horsemen snuck in once again on that villager line, and so much attention is being drawn by Mista, but look what Mista is now doing. In the north, he's ready to rock and roll. Starts to shift the army forward. Really needs to get some sort of siege weapon that can get through the base, though. That's the concern with this composition. Only 5 knights means he has next to no way of actually sieging into Vortix right now.
Absolutely. At this point, there is minimal amount of damage that he can cause without heavy siege weapons, and Vortix has a powerful defense here. That's 5 mangonels, 1 volley, and the entire army of Mista is wiped out by those.
Yep, and only 3 Springolds, so it takes him a while to get through the mangonels in return, and the horsemen can force a very uncomfortable fight. It feels like you're still reliant on the scouts, and the scout count is not good here for Mista. Springolds, nice snipe out, gets rid of one of the mangonels. Movement forward straight away. It looks like he wants to force the fight, understanding that he can clump, and Mista, because he doesn't have his own Mangonels, has no answer to it. Movement in with the Horseman onto the Springald. One is going to fall. Chase in with the Mace of the Horseman. Everything. Spears in the meantime, keeping the Knights at bay, and Mangonels going to force the Arbitraries back, almost in range. Shots come out. Decent damage, not the best though. Didn't hit to the main clump. In the meantime, the wrap in with the Knights and the Scouts trying to get through the Mangonels. 3 of them left alive, second one to go down. Only 2 left right now. And it looks like the front line is not going to hold for long for Vortix. Knights moving through. 2 Mangonels remain in the cluster. The damage! Arbitrary is holding fast, but dying even faster. The Mangonels, he doesn't even take out the injured one. The Springald doesn't find its value. The Mangonels do, and all of a sudden, Mista is once again going to be booted out of the base of Vortix.
And the spearmen are just such a vital part of this army here, because Mista's army was mostly arbaletier. He was ready for the men-at-arms, he was ready for knights, but he wasn't ready for spearmen, something that counters both his knights and the arbaletier, and they're just overrunning those units out there. Part of the reason why those arbaletier couldn't take good fights out there is because the spearmen just flooded them. Key timing over here, and Mista is down to 27 army now. He's on the back foot. Still, he's got a 4th position to act as a buffer though, but as he said, his eco was spread out, so the moment he starts falling behind, he's in trouble.
And these horsemen have been running around all the while. Vortix still has small contingents flanking, looking for your eco pockets. And you're about to lose the front of your defense. At that stage, the flood happens. It's a tsunami wave of HRE troops straight for these forests. And it's something that Mista needs to be prepared for. And the fact that he's still relying on the same composition does not bode well for the future.
It does not. Especially because now Vortix is given a bit of a breathing room, and he's got those Ragna's Cathedral relics really saving his life right now. In fact, he's got more gold income than his opponent, as now he's slowly crawling out of his base. He basically had no mineable golds available for the last 15 minutes, but he's able to recover because he's got 3 Ragna's Cathedral relics working for him, and as you said, that previous fight where he was able to grab that relic is just so vital, because that's an extra 300 gold per minute that he obtained with that.
And it allows him to keep affording these man-at-arms in conjunction with replacing the Mangonels at a pace that matches anything that Mista can do. And although he's trying to get Springals out, look at what he's doing. He's fixing his mistake. Finally, Mista says, okay, actually, Mangonels are pretty good. I guess the reason we've been saying it's the most important thing in the meta. He will produce his own. And this could screw over Vortix. Vortix has gone hardcore into the Zerg factor. With all these man-at-arms and these spears, it leaves him very vulnerable to Mangonel shots. Mangonel shots that are now going to come in. Shots are in, decent damage done. Spears have to peel away along with the Horsemen. They can't hang around and fight.
Indeed, once the Mangonels come in, suddenly that full infantry composition of the Holy Roman Empire is going to get worrisome, and you still get the feel that while Vortix has been taking some good fights over here, ultimately, Mista just suffocating him. He's the one with the overwhelming majority of the map under his control, and at some point, you're going to start running out of wood here for Vortix, because he's gonna have infinite food and gold from the farming and the Ragna's Cathedral, but wood is becoming a bigger and bigger concern for Vortix going deeper into this game.
And I think it's the lack of vision that's really hurting Vortix, because he's paranoid about what Mista's doing. That's why he keeps pushing out like this. He could try and curb in and move to an Imperial Age, but instead he wants a big military and he wants to show it off. So he keeps running out blindly into these forests and getting caught off guard by what Mista has next. Every time he gains ground, and then the additional fight that leads up from that, he loses the ground he originally gained. It feels like a futile war that will never end, but maybe this time it will. Because all of a sudden, Vortix is doubling the Siege Workshop production. He drops a second Siege Workshop, switches over into the Springwalls, and remember that with all that passive gold, he can easily afford this initial investment. The question is whether Mista is going to be wise to it. Look at his formation. He only has a single Springwall this time around and 4 Mangonels. All of a sudden, he could be at the receiving end of these giant ballistas, shattering the hopes of his Mangonel dreams.
The question right now for Vortix is whether he is gonna be able to move out of his base though, because the biggest problem right now is that he's surviving, but he's not getting ahead at all in this game. He could of course just hope that Mista is sort of grinding down his forces and just keep charging into his base, and with successful defense every once in a while, he might just be able to grind down the army of Mista, opening up a chance for counterattack. But it's just very difficult right now for Vortix to move out of his base. He's trying to sneak out on the left side. I'm curious to see if Mista spots that, and indeed he does. Vortix has no idea.
Oh my god, Vortix. Moving in with the Springall count of 4. This might be hard for Mista to take the fight, but he does have the vision on his side. Mangonels spraying out. Not good shots on the Horseman, though. The main force will engage on the west side. 3 Mangonels over here ready to cluster them up and punish them exactly for it. Mangonels shoot out. Decent damage, but the spread just in time. Vortix just weaving out a long line here to minimize the damage the Mangonels can do. His Mangonels about to be exposed to the Knights as they ride in. He needs to return with the spears, and that means he can turn around with his own spears to clean up the Mangonel army. And Mista, in the blink of an eye, is going to lose his siege force, and he's not able to get through all the Mangonels belonging to Vortix. Some of them protecting the center, plenty of spears left. The Arbalatriz will now move in range to clean up those anti-siege units, but the damage out from the Mangonels once again is the kryptonite to Mista's Arbalatriz.
Oh, but what a fight over there. There was just such a back and forth fight. Because for a long time, it seemed like Mista's just gonna wipe out Vortix's army because of all those good mangonel shots. But as I said, Vortix was the one with the springboards available, so he could stamp down the opponent's siege. Whereas it was very difficult for Mista to maintain his own. And suddenly the army numbers are heavily in the favor of Vortix.
Here comes the flood. You only have one Mangonel. That Mangonel now gone. That means you're free to Zerg in as you choose. Mangonels are being produced by Mista. That's going to force the back away, but the Springals will instantly snipe them out. They'll be able to get both of them, in fact, and this is a costly investment instantly lost for Mista before it gets any true value.
And Mista is just falling behind more and more in the army department. At this point, the towers are still standing strong, but the knights are disappearing from the battlefield, and now there's just no response to those mangonels and springolds. Mista about to pop out some new ones, but those will be immediately destroyed upon spawning. You see that they are gonna spawn, and the springolds and the mangonels will just take them down in a split second.
Well, the one redeeming factor that saved him is the fact that this outpost with the Springald upgrade has been sniping out those Springalds. That has slowed things down, but now they're starting to be burnt to the ground. So it might be that you once again lose these Mangonels, and then you might lose the 4th base. And if Mista loses that, this game looks grim, because remember, each of these buildings is 300 wood. You're going to have to reproduce them somewhere else, build a new siege army, and you're finally going to let the beast out of the cage, and he might just maul you and your family, because Vortix, he's been hungry. He's been starving in here. He's ready to thrive, and he has the power to dive deeper into this line. As he's going to snipe out more of the Mangonels, he'll clean up the siege workshop, and all of a sudden, anarchy is going to set in for the very loose French economy.
As you said, being spread out has its advantages because there's just so many resources to work with, but it also means that it's just going to be so exposed to all these counterattacks. And the other thing is that the resources on the map has been depleted, so it's very difficult for Mista to access those resources, whereas Vortix still has that infinite gold income from Ragnit's Cathedral, and he has very easily accessible resource on the right side. It's not like he's been depleting a ton of his resources. So suddenly, Mista is the one that's going to struggle accessing resources and just rebuilding that army, as Vortix is just pushing deeper and deeper towards his base.
That hurts. I don't know if you saw that. Mista was floating a lot of gold. It all just disappeared. I think he traded it all for food and wood, and he barely got anything for it. He had over 2,000 gold saved up. All just gone in the blink of an eye. Vortix can do that freely. It doesn't hurt him, right? Because he just gets it all for free. It's passive income. Meanwhile, Mista, this is his finite resource that's going to be critical, because what do French want to build? Arbalatriz and Knights. What has he stubbornly been building the whole time? Arbalatriz, Knights, and Mangonels. What do all 3 of those units have in common? They tend to cost a lot of gold to make, and all of a sudden, that resource that you've tapped pretty much dry is going to be gone from the equation, and it means your quality army can quickly fall apart as he started to switch up into archers.
Is it a little too late, though, because there's 4 or 5 mangonels crawling up, and those archers will just be butchered by them, especially with Springald support. Knight as a counterattack for Mista will deliver quite a big punch, but at this point, it's about stopping that spearhead that's just going to flood your base in a matter of seconds.
Exactly. You can raid, but you can't kill. Vortix with an army this big can kill you. That's the problem. And these Mangonels, once again, unaddressed. No siege workshop seemingly anywhere because he can't afford it. Okay, he's got one on the right side, but look, it's not producing. There's no new siege weapons coming out. You have no way to access the Mangonel army, and it feels like Vortix is just marching to the victory tomb right now as he rolls up into the French base, and there's seemingly no answer to the HRE Zerg.
There is just no answer in here. 26 army against 93, that's 4 times the army right now for Vortix, and some of Mista's forces are inside Vortix's base. There's just a handful of knights trying to stand tall here, but the spearmen will just make a quick work with them, and with that many mangonels, you can actually start targeting those landmarks, the town center, the school of cavalry, and the guild hall, all next to each other. It is just such an easy thing to wipe out at this point, and Mista, as you said, he's out of resources, in particular food. Only 6 on food with 15 food in the bank. He just can't replenish his forces. It's game over for him.
It really is. I mean, you know, if you ever want an invite to kill someone off landmarks, as you put it perfectly, this cluster that Mister's got right here just says, kill me. This game has gone on for 40 minutes. I pinned you in your base at all times. You couldn't move out, and yet somehow now I'm going to just kill me. This is ridiculous. He had over 3/4 of the map the entire time, and Vortix just gives him the middle finger and says, oi, mate, game 3's mine.
And it's the power of the HRE here, really. As I said, it's a very underappreciated civilization for that eco-juggernaut it is. And with that, Mista is seconds away from tapping out from this game. The starting town center is being burned down, and he taps the GG button. An absolute heartbreaker for Mista, because really, he did everything he could, controlled the overwhelming majority of the map, yet Vortix was just able to turtle this out for so long and really build on that super efficient HRE economy, ultimately just swinging this in his favor. If you look at the total unit count, it was a smaller and smaller advantage for Mista in those key battles, and by the end of the game, Vortix was able to overtake him. But I think the story is gonna be told by those economies, which for Vortix, having comparable to Mista, with Mista having way more villages and way more map control, is a massive win for Vortix.
I think what this speaks to more when you look at his numbers well is actually Mister's mismanagement of his composition. We highlight this halfway through, right? Like, where's the transition? What are you doing next? Your opponent has changed. Why are you not changing? I think Vortix, the critical fights that turn this with the Mangonel, you understand the first fight where he gets away with that, but the next two, before there's even any sort of counter siege coming out from Mister, feels like a really weird, stubborn way for Mister to play the game. I think he definitely had opportunities to end this. Really big credit to Vortix for coming back the way he did. And it really speaks volumes to how he was efficient with his eco. Like when we look at that gold number, especially the fact that he's over 5k behind his opponent, but at the end of the day, he's got surplus eco, his opponent hasn't. I think speaks volumes to the fact that Vortix at every turn was finding efficient ways to invest in his army. And Mister, on the other hand, was essentially as the guy ahead, not really looking for a way to one-up his opponent or use these powerful counters, because really Age of Empires 4 at its heart is truly a game of counters. Instead, he was just kind of playing this quality comp, right? Where he's like, well, my units are good. And that's it. They're good, right? It's like someone in an argument just saying, well, you're stupid. And meanwhile, Vortix, he's just got pipe in his mouth. He's giving an elegant answer like he's a lecturer at a local university. He's like, well, actually, you really need to mix in the spearmen to deal with the arbitraries and then make sure they're backed up by the mangonels to punish them for clustering. It's elementary, my dear boy. Mister, all the while, just spamming the same unit over and over again. He's like, but I'm winning, guys. I have 4/5 of the map. There's no way I lose to an HRE player boxing his base, but well, lesson learned. Mister really needs to be ahead on those switch ups. I think he could have easily closed this out, but Vortix just gave him a paddling and an important lesson in why composition is critical.
And this is an absolute heartbreaker for Mista, because we've talked about this one. Mista himself said that he doesn't like to play in very long sets because he's getting exhausted by the end of it. And from that perspective, Vortix is someone that would prefer long sets, and we have just seen a very, very long game that ultimately ended with a Vortix victory. So not only did Mista lose this game, it also was a very long game, so that attrition factor is going to be bigger and bigger as we go deeper into this set.
Yeah, for real. Like it's someone we highlighted in the beginning. You said you talked to him. He'd been honest about it as well. Not sure if it's the best thing to be honest about. Just imagine Vortix is there listening. He's like, ah, ha, 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 ha. Alrighty, what's that? I could easily give you the GG win in game 3. What if we just make this a 40-minute game? And oh, look at that, halfway through the series, Mister needs a nap. He's not getting one. So that fatigue factor. I mean, when you get that sort of info, maybe it's not the best thing to offer up so willingly, because some players will understand that. They'll remember those details, right? Whether it's something that you saw your opponent do in a matchup before that you can exploit, whether it's something that they've been honest about being a weak point and you can see the data to support that. Like, players will take any edge they can get, right? You want to be an advantage player. We talked about Marine Lord before, how he dominated the meta, especially in the animation cancel meta. A lot of people are like, that's scubby, that's not honorable. It doesn't matter. When you're talking about being a pro level player, if you're presented with, like, say you're in a prison cell and you're given a file, you don't say, no, that's dishonorable. I have to disarm the guard and take his keys and elegantly make my way out. No, just file down the bars and make your way out. You take any edge you can be given, and Vortix really must be feeling like he's been handed that by Mister. As we're looking at a game 4 where fatigue is going to start to set in, as you talked about, and also Civ limitation is going to start to set in, because we've drained a decent amount now. 3 of them are gone. Some premium ones in there for sure. France, HRE. What else do we lose? I'm trying to think. England is gone as well, which I think is going to be like a big loss for Mister as well. You start to have the question, what is the next? What is Mister's Ura going to be? Because I think this next game is critical. I feel like if he doesn't win game 4, this could easily just go all the way to Vortix. I feel like after that game, you've just got to be gutted, right? Could you imagine playing a game like that, having that much control, and then still losing to Vortix that way?
Yeah, it's a heartbreaker. It's 100% a heartbreaker, especially because it was a long game, it was an exhausting game. It was a game where he really felt confident about himself. Like, he was able to limit the HRE player to 2 relics for a long time. He had a very nice forward position and all the map control. I'm not even sure if I've seen a lot of AoE 4 games where the player with like 80% of the map control for 30 minutes actually ends up losing, because that's just such a tremendous amount of resources coming in. But that's the HRE power, and really, when you look at the HRE as a civilization, like, if you talk about French, you will say they are a cavalry civilization. When you talk about Mongols, they are known for their early aggression. And when you talk about the Holy Roman Empire, just say they're an economy civilization. And that's what we've seen over there. Such a powerful economy that you're able to overcome such a deficit.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it speaks volumes of Vortix's capabilities as a player. I think like a lot of people think that previous experience in different games is just actively discarded and it doesn't like hold credence. But there's so many kind of cross pollination skills that you have, right? It's not always just about like, oh yeah, well like Warcraft is not Age of Empires, you can't relate that. Think of how many times like Vortix has probably been in a pickle. He's had his back up against the wall, and over time he's learned things like being calm, being composed, not feeling pressured. I think it speaks volumes to like his ability to kind of maneuver under that pressure and where he learned that over years of crafting himself in Warcraft and Starcraft. Because really, there's a lot of players, rookies on the scene, that despite how amazing they are and how cocky and confident and suave they are at taking games, if they were pinned like that with all those pings going off, with all these alerts about being attacked left, right, and center, they'd choose the wrong outpost to attack. They wouldn't notice some of their villagers dying. All these details would slip through. But I have to say, despite like the whoopsie daisies occasionally from Vortix, overall, despite all these pings across the map going off, all these things he had to address, there wasn't this big critical detail where I'm like, I don't know, he like really screwed up there. I feel like Vortix lost the game in that moment. We can talk about the clumsy move out with the prelate with a relic, or the way that he accidentally rolled, I believe it was a Mangonel into a wonky situation, 2 of them in fact. But there was never this critical mistake that was irreversible for him in this game, and that speaks credence and volumes to his veterancy in the RTS scene.
It looks like we have game number 4 up here for us. So we're in the spec countdown screen. And we will have a Mongols versus French matchup. The question is the map that we'll take a look at in a moment. And the answer is King of the Hill. Mongols is an interesting choice over here for
Wow.
Mista on his own home map, because this is not necessarily a map that you often associate with the Mongols, especially because the French are just such a powerful civilization over here. French are really good at that focus on that one sacred site in the middle, and especially if this game goes long, a red palace in the central area is easily a game-winning move.
Yeah, so one of the big things I'm looking for when we look at King of the Hill is wood deficiency, because a big issue that any Civ has is how reliant am I on wood early on, and how crippled am I by the lack of it. These generations tend to be merciless when it comes to your initial wood cluster, and usually one side tends to get more screwed over than the other in terms of where their follow-up clusters are, because you have to move out to the west or the east to get access to those big wood lines. The cool thing about this matchup is I think that it's fair to say that Mongols are a little bit more wood reliant in their compositions. They want outpost spam. They want to do all these things that usually require that little bit extra investment of wood. While France is going to be maybe looking to play into the gold. Now, usually when we talk about France and we talk about this type of map, we start to get into discussion of like, oh, pocket ecos, how loose can they play? And I think both sides want to play loose with pocket ecos. So the important detail that I'm going to be looking for here is, does one side spam heavily into the cavalry, and does the other follow or try to play some niche strategy? I think whoever plays cavalry hard and at least plays it loose and quite dynamic could easily take the win here. I'm thinking like Marine Lord levels of like micro groups. Have like 3 or 4 different groups of cavalry running circles around the enemy base. I think that is very oppressive in King of the Hill, where you very quickly have to move out from the safety of your TC.
That's always a possibility. On the other side, Mista has the Mongols, and he's one of the players that's just extremely effective with a Mongol fast castle build. In fact, I think he has the cleanest fast castle build with all the Mongols. He's got some very crazy timings with that. I think he's able to nail like a 7 minutes fast castle with the
Yeah.
Mongols. And one of the ways you can diagnose that is by seeing him dropping early pastures. This is something that's a pretty common Mista build.
Mhm.
I haven't really seen that many other players using that, and this is something that Mista prefers to use in team games over 1v1s. But Mista is definitely one of those players that isn't relying on the early aggression component of the Mongols as much as the other players do.
Yeah, so I think the big thing to highlight with Mister here, he definitely is like one of those innovators on the pasture build, as you said, one of the first people to do it. I think where it becomes accessible is when you have an Uvu close to your TC. Anything else feels like it's going to be exploited by raiding from French cavalry. So I think that's the important detail to look for. If Mister does have a very loose spawn where a TC is far away from the Uvu, I don't want to see him going pasture because for a start, you have that small wood line to begin with. You have finite wood. 150 a pop for a pasture is a heavy take out of that initial wood influx. And then on top of that, if you do have them near an Uvu nowhere near your base, French cavalry will ride in, burn them in the blink of an eye, and all of a sudden you are sinking so much of your economy into nothing. So I think that's the important detail. Mister needs to show a little bit of um, discipline, shall we say? Because I know that he tends to go for this pasture. I want to say like 80% of the time. Even when the game looks kind of weird for it in formation wise, I've seen him go towards it. And while when the layout is perfect for it, it is mwah, chef's kiss type combo. When you've got that loose eco split from your Uvu, it leaves you way too exploitable by high exploitation type players. And Vortix, like I said before, he ticks that box. He will see that weakness, he will smell blood, and he will maul you like a vicious tiger.
With that being said, game number 4 is coming up. This is almost a must win here for Mista. He really doesn't want to fall behind by 2 games compared to Vortix, because that would mean Vortix would have match point going into next game. We're moving to the second home map of Mista, which is King of the Hill. Down south, we will have Vortix playing as the French in blue, and to the north, we're going to have Mista spawning in as the Red Mongols. The Mongols will give him a flexibility when it comes to finding trees, though, and that's not something that we have talked about yet. Mongols might actually place their TC a tiny bit closer to those bigger forests.
Yeah, this is actually one of the situations where being like the Mongols is a ridiculous advantage for this generation. Any other Civ gets this Northern generation, you're flipping the table and asking for a restart. Look at the back here. There's no wood. There's no reset. There's no soft point where you can safely gather wood. It's all to the center. But this works to the Mongols' advantage because remember what we've seen about the pasture spam. The only way I tick it and say it's a good move by Mister is if he has a close Uvu. And because he shifts towards the center where these stone deposits are clustered, you're likely to get that. And in a lot of ways, Mister has been very fortunate this generation. The Uvu's in range. He can play into the pastures. And also, he can safely expand to the west and get huge chunks of wood available to him so easily. On the other side, Vortix does have plenty of wood sites around him. But notice that I think the more important detail here is that this wood is so easily accessible for Mister. I think he got a great start here, and we're in for a great game.
Absolutely. Like, on the right side, there is basically no easily accessible wood for Vortix, and while on the left side he has a big forest to work with, both of his small forests are on the left side and just generally very exposed to aggression from Mista. So Mista's gonna be able to apply a lot of aggression from the left side, not only deny potentially all the forests, but also some gold and even the berries. So Mista, if he positions his forces on the left side, he could do a ton of damage to Vortex, and there is the first pasture coming out here for Mista. Such a clever placement. It's actually even closer to the DC, so not directly
Mhm.
right next to the Ovu. It's within the Ovu influence, but as close to the TC as possible, so the walking time is minimized.
Yeah, that's actually nicely done. A lot of players got good at this. We see it with outposts as well, right? They tend to put it right on the edge so they're not blocking anything else being put nearby. And it's a little bit short of a distance to run, so it's less efficiency for your workers. I got to feel a little bit frustrated for Vortex looking more at the south side. I think it's kind of weird that this generation didn't actually put any sort of like cliffside on the west side of his base. I think it becomes a lot more defendable if that's there. This amount of open ground could be very exploitable by Mister. It's just a case of what type of composition he wants to go for. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like spears and archers. Maybe try to play for that early outpost rush because, as you mentioned, these small wood lines leave you very exposed to the French player in the south. And there's no easy way to alleviate that because the big ones to the south and west are so far away from the safety of your town center.
Second pasture now coming up here for Mista. He also managed to collect precisely 1 sheep with that con over here, so part of the reason why he has to add so many pastures at the beginning is because he doesn't have a ton of sheep to work with. But as I said, this is something that he commonly does as his Mongol build order. It's obviously he's not doing any kind of Dark Age pressure at this point, so it comes down to whether he's just gonna go try get to fast feudal, or maybe this is some kind of fast castle build over here. If he can beat Vortix to Castle Age here and go double Lancers, Vortix is gonna have a serious trouble. Because, as I said, this map is just wide open for raiding for the French with their knights, but that's just as much applicable for the Mongols if they get to Castle Age and Lancers.
I think feudal is critical here. Like, it almost feels like I'm a broken record. I think this is the meta. Like, this is the patch of feudal, and it definitely shows in this matchup because if Mister gets initial control, he can set up the outpost network, which will give him a staging point from which to operate with fast dynamic units, which then leads into those lancers, which will always outmaneuver the French knights. Now, should they both arrive in castle at the same time, and that outpost network isn't down, you have to give the edge to the French knights, because if they get that charge off against the lancers, they get buff damage for 3 seconds. All of a sudden, you are being overwhelmed in the blink of an eye. And although a Khan can negate some of that damage, you have to be so on point with the use of your maneuver arrow and your defense arrow to make that work. So I think really important that Mr. finds a way to kind of set the trend in feudal, move across the map, oppress Vortix for having such a exposed and open base area, and then essentially allow himself to cruise into castle while Vortix is struggling to get the resources together for it.
Looking at the base of Mista, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a direct fast castle, or at least he's going to spend some time in Feudal Age for sure, because his resource bank isn't looking super powerful. Obviously, there's a lot of risk associated with a naked fast castle build from a Mongol player out here. The reason why I'm saying that this is actually a possibility is because, first, it actually plays into the usual Mongols playstyle of Mista, and second, it's because I'm not exactly sure what he would do against the French over here in Feudal Age if it doesn't go for early aggression, because he's yet to make a single production building, so by the time he gets his army out, Vortix is gonna have a couple of knights and he's gonna be able to start harassing him. So I feel like if you're not going for a ton of aggression, it might already be a little too late, but we're getting the answer, or are we?
It depends. There's no Gurse and no Pro Scouts coming. It's going to be stable into Horsemen. I think he's looking to ramp up into about 8 Horsemen and then trying to, like, aggress his opponent's wood line.
He cancelled the stable and now he's replacing that with a barracks, so
Okay.
he felt a little indecisive over there, and it looks like it's just gonna be Spearman defense, as it seems. He's aware of the French adding knights, of course, it's quite predictable out there. He's just going to micro back with that Khan for the time being. The question is when Vortex is going to add that archer range, because when you're up against any civilization that has a legitimate spear opening against the Royal Knights, you want to go for that fast archer range immediately, and Vortex is already doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no doubt in my mind. Like, it makes more sense. When I saw the stable. So he's actually going for the spears plus the horsemen. This is interesting because actually, like, while the archers are annoying, the spearmen just negate all the powers of the Royal Knights. So I think the whole idea is he just wants to try and capitalize on stabbing into that villager count if Vortex ever reveals it. And of course, if you end up being Vortex moving out into this mid ground, you've got a long way to run to safety, so your archers could easily be picked apart. It is definitely a funky opening. It's, if I had to like give statistics, I'm pretty sure this is the least trodden path of the 3 options, right? Like usually it's either racks and archers or archers and stables. It's not often that we get treated to racks plus stables.
Mista still adding pastures over here for himself. He's still on gold though. So this is why I'm suspecting that it might actually end up being some sort of semi-fast castle approach, because if he wanted to go very heavy on the horseman and spearman department, he would probably pull away the villagers from gold. Because there is not a single gur for anything like professional scouts or wheelbarrow, no blacksmith so far for any kind of upgrade. So the only reason why he would be building up gold at this point is to potentially think about Castle Age.
I think he might be right here, but he's got a few initial horsemen coming out. Looks like, actually, no, he's going heavy in. So he's going to have 6 horsemen in total and then upgrade them into the normal stats from early. The interesting part is actually, I think this is a direct result of what he scouted Vortix doing. Vortix went for pro scouts, and this is a logical play for a French player with this generation because you don't have enough wood to justify a switch over to farmlands safely. So instead, he's going to go for the safety of gathering game underneath his own TC. But because this was revealed by Mr., Mr. now feels like he can pressure the wood supply and choke Vortix out, so the only thing he can really gather is food.
And that's a nice reaction. It's very possible that he changed up his strategy on the fly. He picks up one scout from the opponent, and suddenly it's going to be difficult for Vortex to access the hunts, especially because he's walling out the other hunt, so it's going to have to require a gate to get through those. And as things stand, Mista is able to deny one of those, and he's sending the horseman to the right side. So, as you said, it's all about sort of suffocating your opponent when it comes to resource access. Mista also banking up some resources as we speak, so he's going a little heavier on the fuel age than maybe initially planned, but still, continuously piling up gold behind this one.
Yeah, and to be honest, Mista could just ride in for a fight right now. Like, you're pretty strong. The only reason he hasn't yet is he's waiting for the early horseman upgrade, but there it is. Moving in with the new arrow. Clash with the knights. Horsemen just need to access those archers, and they'll be exposed. As Vortix, he shuffles the formation to the back. The archers are going to be exposed, and he's forced to retreat. It's already a lost fight for him. The problem is if he gives up any more ground, his villagers are going to be exposed, and that's going to be a problem. He shifts off of the wood line instantly, but now that means that Vortix is no longer gathering wood and can no longer produce archers.
And just look at the resource bank, 500 food, 300 gold. Mista realized that a clear, just plain fast castle over here isn't gonna work for reasons you stated before. The professional scouts would pay off so easily for Vortix, so he's changing up his idea. He's going to start adding some spears, some horsemen, and this way he's limiting the access of Vortix to the hunt. And you see, as I said, because you actually vote those hunts out, you have to make a gate over here to be able to access the majority of those, as it is possible Mista's going to shift in that direction, trying to intercept those scouts.
Not quite quick enough to do so, but this is the power of horsemen also against scouts, right? They're so much slower now, so you can actually poke and prod them down, whereas before it was kind of trivial. Horsemen do not find their value in the end, so scouts will secure some more carcasses. But this pressure is keeping his opponent boxed in. It means that Mista never has to build any defensive structures near his own base, paranoid about his own villages. And you see he's starting to shift out into the berry bush lines, right? He's starting to get a little bit risque with his eco. He's also dropped the blacksmith. I think this is a flexibility play in case he wants siege engineering. But now, given the state of the game and the lack of pressure that Vortix is able to apply, it looks like Mista is going to cruise to a very quick castle age timing that Vortix cannot even begin to contest.
Exactly. And that is the reason why I kept those villagers around. He wanted to do this sort of semi-fast castle opening for a long time. It's just a matter of the fact that he reacted to what the Vortix was doing, and this is why he added some more army. But this is very dangerous right now for Vortix, because he's nowhere close to castle. His army is not suitable to take this fight already, and this is just gonna get worse and worse. And Mista still has quite a lot of stone to work with, so he will be able to pop out some lancers with double production.
And this is from this state of the game, this is a highly exploitable map for the Mongols, right? Like step redoubt, you're looking at as much gold as possible, and King of the Hill, you know exactly where to find it all, and it's all clustered together. It's so efficient for you, because also when you set up defenses of outposts that we usually see from step redoubt, like droppers as they move away from their base, if you look between these initial two big gold veins, let's say he pops down the step redoubt between the two of them, he drops outposts, it covers and defends both of these veins, right? So you're actually getting that little layer of efficiency to how many outposts are required to keep your gold expansion safe.
Mista almost up to Castle Age over here, whereas on the other side, Vortix is just light years away. That's part of the problem is going for this kind of army composition with the French. It just takes forever to get to Feudal Age, or Castle Age, excuse me, because the Royal Knights are extremely food heavy, the Archers are also relatively food heavy, so you're depleting your key resources going into Castle Age, whereas for Mongols, they're just a lot cheaper, a lot more cost effective than not depleting their gold, making this unit composition. So it is much easier to accumulate the resource needed for Castle Age, whereas for French, it takes a lot of time for them to get to Castle if they maintain military production.
And Vortix had no clue this was going on. Because notice what Mista kept doing? He kept running the horseman in range of his vision. He just wanted to let him know, we're still here, by the way. So now Vortix, he gets that a confirmation that castle's been achieved, and look what he instantly does with his army. It was defending his wood line, but now it needs to move. He knows that going for castle himself is just not feasible. He needs to get in and punish his opponent before he's able to fully capitalize on his technological advantage.
Deerstones has been pulled all the way to the middle, so the Yam network has been expanded. Spearmen trying to rally to try and intercept those knights. The army of Mista is a little bit spread out though, so he's a little bit of in a precarious position. But the Lancers, and those are Castle Age Lancers, are coming in. He just needs a couple of them to repel this attack.
Yep, and archers can't quite reach the spears. Spears delay things long enough. As you say, the lance is now starting to arrive. The Royal Knights, if they can get their charge off, they can to a certain degree deal with the Lancers. There's just so much crap in there to get through, right? The Spearmen and the Horsemen are really frustrating for Vortix, but here he goes. It's all in. It's do or die now. You either find maximum impact and shut Mr. out, or you are going to be lights out in this game in a matter of minutes. And there it is. Drops the ram straight away. No hesitation. He has to find the impact, and he has to find it now.
And as you see, he's committing all of his resources into production, double ranges, and a school of cavalry is just pumping out cavalry as well. He knows exactly that he needs to fight this, but every moment he delays, he gives a bigger and bigger window to add those castle age units for Mista. A couple of seconds ago, it was like 2 Lancers, now it's like 6 or 7. We're seeing some Men-at-Arms
Uh,
being mixed in, and I just don't think that the power is here
oh
for
no.
Vortix.
I don't think Vortix meant to do that. He garrisoned the battering ram. He didn't get the second one out. He's going to be forced to fight now. The archer's out of position. The knights are not holding long enough against the spears. In fact, the spears getting maximum value, countering out the unit they've been looking for. The count is looking good still for Vortix, though. The French Knights holding for the moment, but the Lances and Man-at-Arms coming in, and that is when he's going to clean house. Mista looking like he might just even this up. The army is all but depleted. The battering ram investment is really not paying off anymore for Vortix, and Mista is pushing him back and out.
He has such an easier time reinforcing this battle, and indeed, Vortix is going to tap out. He's realizing that there is no way that he's going to win that fight, and the moment he loses that fight, he's just gonna have no room for recovery. Mista, crucial victory over here with a crystal clean game.
Exactly what we need to see as well. Mista, we were saying that, if he loses this one, I felt like if he failed to actually capitalize on this map, it was just going to be a turning point from bad to worse. I think Vortix would have actually clean sweeped him from this point. But all of a sudden, we got a series on our hands. We do still have to be concerned about that fatigue that Mista has been honest about, but he's finally put the brakes on Vortix's pressure. It's very easy after the way Game 3 went to be absorbed in the frustration, the way that you got stomped out, and easily just tilt when you reach Game 4. But Mista, calm, composed, understands the power timing, isn't one-minded either. You kept mentioning he was thinking about that castle age, but he wasn't greedy about it. He was present and able early on enough to deter Vortix's aggression. And because Vortix thinks that his opponent is then fully invested in the feudal, he never once tries to aggress into the base of Mista. And you saw that that was the case because originally Vortix, before that castle age ticked up, his whole army was at the back of his base guarding his wood supply. He was paranoid about coming under the assault of the Mongols. The moment that castle age ticked, everything changed. Vortix's state of mind went from calm to panic. He rushes forward across the map, but he has no time at all to get in position. Even with the double battering ram attempt, he knows that it all seems futile the moment he sees his man-at-arms coming out. And after that initial fight, it's just all lights out for him. 2-2 apiece now means this series is actually going to go the distance, longer than any other series, in fact, as we're going to need at least 2 more games to decide who will be the final member to go through from the first qualifier to that $100,000 LAN in Germany.
Such a crucial victory there for Mista, and really, as you said, the key element was that he wasn't greedy about it. It's not like he went into this game saying, okay, I have this game plan, but he adapted his build on the fly based on what he saw from Vortix, and this was just such a clean execution out there, and this is what distinguishes great players from good players, being able to adjust your strategy and approach on the fly based on what you're seeing from your opponent.
Exactly. Like, your average Andy can win a perfect game, right? Like, if everything works out as they planned from start to finish and they never had to, like, change course at all, like, that's simple. Like, I can even do that. That's just following a script, right? Best players adapt on the fly. They understand that the game is a dynamic affair between two individuals, and the agreed rules are never, like, always the same. Things change, and you have to change the way you play the game. And that is what proves that Mr. can be a top level player. He's going to need that as this series continue on. However, you cannot overlook the fact he just took a victory, what should be one of the easier civs to take a victory of. Mongols is, even after all this time, definitely seen as one of the more powerful and capable civs to clutch you an easy dub. But at the same time, impressive that you remove French from the pool for Vortix, and all of a sudden we're starting to scrape deeper into that barrel, and we get into the civs that get played less. We might be considering, for example, Mista. Does he need to go to Abbasis next because he hasn't got much left here? Delhi might start to come out a little bit more. China hasn't been touched at all. We mentioned on that, like right now, it being bugged, a lot of people are trying to avoid it. But if the choice, depending on the map, comes down to say Abbasis and China for Mista, we might find him whipping out the bug civ that a lot of people are still trying to get a feel for ever since the nerfs.
Now we're going to home map for Vortix, and we have 2 slower paced maps remaining over here, Hillandale and Altai. Now, Vortix has used up his HRE already, so he's not going to have HRE available for Hillandale. Likely something like Delhi is going to be part of the equation, because that's probably the best place where you can pick it, and it's possible we're actually going to see a Delhi mirror, or Mista could once again make a big brain move, because Delhi is probably the civilization that you expect here now. So if you have a surefire strategy against that with a slightly different civilization, this would be the time to pop it.
Yeah, so I think if you are worried that Vortix is going to take Delhi, and it seems the most likely option to him, it would be a big mistake to pick HRE here on Hill and Dale. I think it's a Delhi favored matchup. It's just so easy to repress you. The timings are just quicker, and you're playing to similar objectives. The one that could be a curveball is I'm trying to think what Mister has left here. So you already used England, yeah. Abbasis is available, but that would be funky. I don't think that works. I don't think China works either in this situation. Although there might be like a pocket strategy around hyper feudal aggression that could pay off. I'm trying to think what else he hasn't played. He played France. He played England. He
I
just
think
played. Oh, go ahead.
I think that if the Chinese weren't bugged, that would actually be a reasonable counterpick to the Delhi, because in many ways
Yeah,
the Chinese can replicate that Delhi efficient production style play, but we have their answer. It's Delhi mirrors. So
yeah. It's
Mista didn't fall into the trap of just picking the obvious HRE over here, and it's just gonna come down to pure skills. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first matchup. Actually, no, it's the second one where we have mirrors. The first one was Border Bay, that was Rus mirrors.
Yeah, and I think it speaks for itself when you deplete the pool like this. I think the viable options right now in a one-on-one in Hillendale, HRE really falls off if Delhi's still in the pool. So then the one thing that could have been interesting is I think England kind of has some potential in Hillendale against Delhi, just because you choke them into funnel points and they can't fully utilize horsemen. But well, England's already been played. That's how Mista opened up the series. So then you're looking at like these loose outliers. Like we said, China's a little bit too buggy right now. Some people haven't had enough time to like sink their teeth into it because they've been busy honing their Delhi. It just makes sense that you're going to mirror this up. And it's not really too surprising. I think like Hillendale is a really weird map in a lot of people's eyes because if you were talking pre-patch, no one would have anticipated that this is fast kind of becoming Delhi's home map. I feel like it feels fair to say that. I mean, maybe just it's fair to say half of the maps at this stage are Delhi's home map because they're so damn powerful. But if you consider the previous patch, I think that HRE are the ones that get the flag planted in this one, right? Hill and Dale is just pristine for them. It feels so good. Everything's clustered together. You're easily padded and protected. But with Delhi just being the ultimate counter and just trouncing them every turn, I think what we're learning very quickly is with the utilization of quick walling in the early game and the fact that the Delhi are able to do that with their infantry, these natural choke points that once defended you are now your worst nightmare. And that is why Delhi is very quickly turning from prince to king here on Hill and Dale.
Looking at the history of these players with Hillandale, every single set that Vortix has played in the previous rounds of the qualifiers, his home map was Hillandale. Now, we have never seen him played in this tournament, though, because so far he hasn't dropped a single game. He is 2-0 Psyarch, 2-0 versus Doubt, 2-0 versus Kaposh, and now it's 2-2 versus Mista out here. So every time he picked Hillandale, which means that this is likely his strongest home map, but we've never seen him play this. Meanwhile, for Mista, he also is undefeated, by the way, in the previous rounds, but he played Hill and Dale multiple times, but only played Delhi once. That was against an HR in the first round against a massively weaker opponent. So we're not really going to have an accurate representation of his uh, Hill and Dale game plan or strategy from the previous rounds.
Yeah, it's definitely they're playing the cards close to their chest. I think that this one for me, I'm expecting very similar openings. I think these guys have played this enough and they've seen enough the recent games that they understand that like the way that this plays out usually is kind of a little bit of a slog around archers and spears, possibly horsemen in the feudal age. And then essentially you're just trying to pivot into outpost control. So one really important detail could actually just be the layout of this map. It tends to be that usually with the curvature nature of the sacred site generation, one player tends to get the sacred sites, two of them very close to them, and it's easy for them to play towards the advantage because then you're getting an extra 200 gold per minute where your opponent secures the alternative side of the map, sacred site. So really, I think where this game gets decided is about halfway through feudal. There should be a clear outlier, someone taking the lead off the back of sacred site control. One cool idea is considering most players just want to play with those sacred sites and trickle gold to get into castle. What I have seen a few Delhi players do really effectively. In fact, we saw it out of Beastie already. I think it was yesterday, like completely stomped his opponent. Is he actually kind of cheesed his way to an early Delhi victory? And although he had control of sacred sites, he didn't care about it, right? He ram rushed. I believe he built 5 rams in the blink of an eye, and it was surprisingly effective because it just baits your opponent into prepping for a later timing, and then you fall all in when you seek weakness at an earlier timing. But you know what? We're speculating. We need to see what's going to happen. We're finally underway with game number 5, the longest series of the day here between Mista and Vortix, our final one, and it seems fitting that this one could easily go the long distance here, as we're going to have Delhi Mirror on Hill and Dale.
Right side is going to be Vortix opening up with a Mosque immediately in blue, and the same approach is going to be taken by Mista in red, because in such Delhi mirrors, it's a race to efficient production, really, because you're going to be fighting for those sacred sites, and in many ways, this matchup is very similar to what you experienced in Rus mirrors before the actual big patch that nerfed them, because that was something very similar. You did the identical thing, and you were just racing for a certain element of the map, that being the relics. Here is the same thing, you're racing for a certain element of the map, but those are the sacred sites in Feudal Age.
Absolutely. Another thing you're racing towards is those valuable berry bush lines, right? That's just so valuable to both the Delhi and the Abbasis now, since they buff the gather rates and the capacity for which you can carry back to the drop-off points. And one detail that I noticed straight away looking at this map is Mister actually got some nice condensed berry bushes, right? 2 of them on his high ground, one right at the front of his base. Meanwhile, Vortix will have to come out of hiding a little bit more and also shift further down the south to actually extract maximum value for his. So it's a small lead, but it's definitely someone that Mista can leverage because he's going to be playing to the forward of his base. He should naturally be able to actually protect these berry bushes as long as he's ahead. Should Mista ever go on the back foot, that's when it gets shaky. But you can say that same way about both of these berry bushes.
Now, looking at the map as well, we will see one relic on the hill of Vortix here that's actually very well defendable, and that will be valuable in the long run. There's one relic that's moderately well defendable as well for Mista, but it's a little bit more exposed on his side of the hill, and the other 3 relics are spread out in the middle, so fairly balanced map, well, for the players over here. Worth noting that Mista's gonna have a little more difficult time accessing the sacred sites on the south and the north, because there are a couple of forests that are just blocking the direct path to those.
Yeah, but overall, I say that this is a fairly reasonable sacred site generation for a Delhi mirror matchup. I don't feel like anyone got thrown under the bus on this one, which means we should get a very exciting and very close series. The detail I'm gonna be looking towards is like that dance of transition, right? Who's gonna blink first? What's the mismatch gonna be? Because I could very easily see a situation where like 12, 13 minutes in the game, both players have all 3 of the military production buildings because they keep trying to counter each other out.
Dome of Fate coming in right now for Vortix with 3 villagers. On the left side, that landmark is not being constructed just yet by Mista. He's a couple of seconds behind, and in such a mirror matchup, that couple of seconds could actually be very punishing, so we'll have to see if this is going to haunt him. He's already chopping wood, though this is not something that Vortix has started, or at least not on a separate wood line. In fact, he's taking stragglers around his town center, whereas Mista already established a lumber camp.
That's actually a really cool play. It's something that I have been kind of, almost biblical about the importance of when you play Black Forest, right? Is like these straggler trees are so good early on. It's something you don't really see leveraged heavily in Hill and Dale, but in this case, like when you have a few trees like that nearby, it's something that you and the fly can think about doing. A lot of these maps tend to generate without these straggler trees. I'm sure you've noticed that as well, right? They're coming from an AoET background. I feel like most maps in Age of Empires 2, you end up with straggler trees. Sometimes the seeds just say no, and you have nothing nearby, so you have to go in the lumber camp. You don't have an alternative choice. But as a result of this, it's given Vortix a slight lead, and it means that he should be able to cruise up into that feudal age a little bit quicker than Mista.
Indeed, in Age of Empires 2, the straggler trees have insane importance, and in AoE 4, it's way less significant. In fact, oftentimes you see players replacing those straggler trees with buildings, because that's something that you can do with those standalone trees out there. I'm actually not a big fan of that, simply because, as you see, for Vortex, it's actually a pretty decent source of wood in case he doesn't want to add a lumber camp early on. So there's definitely some element in me that says that, hey, you shouldn't replace all of them, but it depends on how you want to approach the game, because if you just want to place buildings around your town center, might as well delete those, especially if you are heavy on the lumberjacking department with the wood line already.
Yeah, I think the biggest map that it shows in really is Black Forest, because in Black Forest, you have like 8 of them, 9 of them or whatever, and because you go on those instead of running far off to your wood line, which is far away in Black Forest, you're able to actually get a dock up quicker and produce non-stop ships where players who move their lumber camp out straight away are actually delayed. So that type of map, it definitely shows a lot. If you ever go and watch replays of that, folks, you'll definitely see that more so than you will on this map. But it has made a slight difference with Vortix. It gives him a slight lead, and after he gets up there, Stable's going to be dropped because he scouted out that Mista is building the barracks. Now, this seems like a counterintuitive play, but it does mean that you'll have the flexibility to move these horsemen around the spears, and Mista might find himself quickly just playing Benny Hills in his own base.
And the thing is that you know exactly that Spearman is not going to be the only unit Mista makes. He's likely going to add archers. So, yeah, of course you have your stable coming out right now, but you're going to have an archer range to back it up very soon. Indeed, there it is. Because it's not about, okay, do I have spearmen versus horsemen? It's going to be spears and archers versus horsemen and archers. That's how you have to approach this.
Absolutely. I mean, the days have changed, right? You can't just say, I'm going to build 3 archery ranges and I'll win like that. No, you need at least 2 units in your composition. Age of Empires 4, more than most other RTSs, in fact, is a counter-heavy game. And it's been designed that way specifically on purpose. You can see it when you even hover over any unit. It says plus 10 or damage to a scout, or with with the spearman, plus 15 damage to cavalry. It's begging you, it's pleading with you to utilize counters. And while transitions can be dangerous to engage with when you're under fire, in this opening, it's so comfortable. There's no pressure already. You're essentially just prepping your first round of arrows metaphorically to fire at each other, right? And in this case, both sides will have arrows. Well, one side will have arrows, the other one will only have those metaphorical arrows, and that means that the spearmen are going to be very lackluster in this initial engagement.
Now, Mista is adding a stable over here, so his unit composition will actually be very similar to what he has used in the previous game. It is going to be the spearman and the horseman, and actually, this might work out nicely because...
Second stable.
Yeah.
Wow.
So... The thing is that if you compare to the previous game, Spearman Horseman, he was able to take some very good engagements against the French player having knights and archers. Makes me wonder if he's gonna have something very similar on his mind right now. He doesn't really have any kind of map presence in the middle, as Vortix is already moving towards the second batch of berries back at home. Mista hasn't started touching those, and he's running out of berries at the starting base though, so soon he'll have to transition to those. As you said, there's 2 stables, both of them with efficient production, so... I guess... Wait, there is no spearman. This actually is a great idea from Mista. There is not a single spearman from Vortix, so obviously going double stables makes a ton of sense here.
Yeah, like he's just doubling down on what works well for him. I mean, honestly, I'm starting to think that Mista is just a big My Little Pony fan. First, England with the horsemen yesterday, and now just spamming only horsemen as the deli here. Not even doing in that composition we talked about being so strong. But the smart detail is, like, he almost just wanted this to be revealed. When Vortix moves in the scout and initially sees the racks, notice he didn't go for more info, he just ran back. And it almost was like Mista baited him on purpose. When you drop a racks at the front of your base and you don't try to deter the scout from going in, you're more or less just feeding false information to your opponent. He never looked for a double stable, and it means this initial fight is going to be heavily favored towards Mista. And it means that Vortix is very quickly going to lose control of the midsection of the map, something he desperately doesn't want to do now that he's started to invest heavily into these scholars, looking to cap all the sacred sites.
And one thing that those horsemen give you is mobility. And that's not something you would normally have with the spearmen, so now you have the numbers advantage with the horsemen, and that gives you unparalleled mobility to try and snipe those scholars. Down south, there's a scholar being killed by wolves. In the middle, you have this scholar now being targeted by the horsemen, and this is just such a great fight here for Mista. He's got the numbers advantage that he can just wipe out that group of archers in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, it's looking a little bit grim for Vortix, but Vortix actually even this up. Look at the count, just drag on both of them. They're very close. The archers are enough to make the difference. I don't feel like this is a good enough account of horsemen. Maybe it's just slightly better micro, but I feel like Mista should have been further ahead on the outcome of this battle. He might still win, but he's going to be limping away with a heavily injured army at this rate.
There was a scholar that was healing up the force of Vortix for a long time, and now there's a scholar coming in for Mista, and he is finishing off those units. It was all about keeping that meat shield of horsemen alive for Vortix, and the reason why it was a little deceiving is because for a long time Mista was focusing it down, but that's the advantage of just bringing in those units really fast, because that's exactly what he's doing. He's got 2 stables, so it's much easier for him to reinforce the battle, and it's funny that you mentioned that it's almost as if he baited his opponent, or he wanted to bait his opponent into thinking he's going spearman. I think it wasn't just almost as if. He legitimately baited Vortix into thinking that he's going spears.
Yeah. And also now Vortix has to address this. Remember what I said we were probably going to see in this game? The triangle was going to be established, all 3 military buildings being built. Vortix doubles down on racks now, so he understands what he needs to be present with. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mista sees this and instantly drops the archery range. For the moment, it's going to be the double blacksmith, a little bit more greedy of a play. But when you have this many horsemen out in the field and you're decapping all these points and capping them yourselves, you probably feel confident that even if your opponent is now responding with the triangle of different units, you can kind of cruise forward to Castle Age with enough resources. And when we look at his surplus resources right now, he's already halfway there. Castle Age is looking very feasible and very fast for Mista.
It is looking feasible because he's the only one controlling the sacred site, and also, let's keep in mind that he didn't lose a ton of archers over here. Like, his opponent did lose a bunch of units, and now he has to remake his army from scratch, whereas on the other side, Mista's army was able to retain its value very effectively, so 15 kills to 9 deaths over here is part of the reason why he has the advantage on the food department, and of course, he's also leveraging the fact that he's got the sacred site. Such a great play by Mista over here, and he's going to be ready to go up with Castle Age. I feel like if he gets to Castle, Vortix is just going to fall apart, just like in the previous game.
Yeah, because right now the problem is Vortix isn't out of his base. Vortix has about a minute and a half to get control of these sacred sites, and you have a slow static army with the combination of your horsemen, right? Your horsemen move fast, but everything else is slow. And I feel like this just is going to be a big sink to morally rather, for Vortix the moment he sees that Castle Age tick up, because he's nowhere near ready himself. He's holding the right amount of gold, but he spent so many chunks of food replacing the lost troops. And even with an army that looks nicely compositioned, right, with the spearmen, the archers, horsemen being kind of equal amounts, the fact is that that tech upgrade is going to come into play, and then you have about 4 minutes to strike before Mista is fully online in Castle Age.
And he's got a barracks. That's where that leftover barracks is actually coming in handy, as on the northern side, a scholar from Vortix will be picked off. Down south, it looks like the scholar will stay alive here until the sacred site is going to be capped, because that horseman from Vortix will be taken down. But Vortix realizes that he needs to launch a counterattack right now. Exactly, just like the previous game.
And he goes straight into the base. He forces everyone off the berries, because that is how you're tapping this. This is how you're making sure you got surplus. The problem he has is Mista already has 800 food surplus for when this tech up completes. While the pressure is decent, you have to admit this army is not big enough to siege. It's going to pressure a little bit, but that tech up is going to complete, and then you're on the clock. You have like 5 minutes to make something happen.
And the men-at-arms will come out in just a matter of seconds. There's only one barracks working over here, and there is not a single scholar in it. The scholar is trying to make a run for it. And if it gets in there, you can get those men-at-arms out quite rapidly, and you just need 3 or 4 men-at-arms to clean this up. This is looking scarier for Mista than it actually is, I think.
Yeah, because Mista's distracted himself. Look at the central sacred site. He sent in like 8, 9 of these horsemen. They got butchered by the spears, and all the while, you have the horsemen of Vortix running in and sniping out all the villagers. Forcing the garrison, forcing them to shift away, and let's look at the eco count. 33 to 42 in the blink of an eye.
Oh, what a collapse there for Mista. It looked so good, but then he just looked away from that army in the middle, and that is just a tremendous amount of units lost over there, because those could have been immensely helpful defending. He's got the Castle Age advantage now. Vortix is going full feudal, so if Mista is able to maintain control over those sacred sites, there's still a glimpse of hope, but he definitely put himself in a much more difficult situation than he should have been in.
Yeah, and while he'll buffer his opponent out now, the damage is kind of already done. He stopped him from gathering the berries. He's starting to get lancers out, which is nice, but when we look at the eco side of things, after all that, 44 eco for Vortix, 31 for Mista. Vortix, reluctant to even consider Castle Age. As you say, he's kind of all in on the feudal, and he's decapping those sacred sites. One has already been taken out of the equation. He's capping the one in the north, and the southern one will remain with Mista for the moment, but not for long, as a horseman will move out to butcher the remaining skull of 13 health. And then all of a sudden, central control is clearly and definitively in the hands of Vortix.
The question is, how is Vortix going to react to the men-at-arms, because he can of course flood the spearmen, but stopping all those men-at-arms will be difficult. He's actually taking a pretty decent fight over here, but the men-at-arms are just increasing in numbers, and I'm not sure how long this can be sustained here in Feudal Age for Vortix, but he's getting ready to go into Castle Age himself.
Yeah, this is prepping him. It's keeping his opponent pinned in. He's still taking good trades against the initial man-at-arms. And also now, once again, Mista is exposing his food line because he can't afford any gaps in his eco. He's draining himself dry. He's his own Dracula in this situation. And the butchering continues. There's just so many spears here. These man-at-arms are just not cutting it right now for Mista.
And behind this, you have 2 sacred sites for Vortix. The win condition here for Mista was that he's leveraging those men-at-arms. to secure the sacred sites, and with those sacred sites, he would be able to compensate for his lack of eco. So it's not even about the 13 villager difference, it's about those 2 sacred sites that are working non-stop for Vortix, and by the time Mista is able to neutralize them, Vortix is able to get to Castle Age, and there is no more technology advantage anymore for Mista.
And there is that Castle Age, fully complete now. Home Blades is already being researched. 3 minutes to go for Mista. On the other side, Vortix did also go in the House of Learning. He's going to prime it, and he's only 4 minutes out from Home Blades, so there will not be much of a difference between these two sides. With the double racks, he can match the man-at-arms count, and so far, these spears have been pristine at pulling apart the initial man-at-arms push-out from Mista.
And the most important thing is that Vortix is maintaining control over 2 sacred sites. These red men-at-arms are just not even running in there, and that is just a couple of extra seconds of gold trickle coming in here for Vortix. It started out so well for Mista, but after that, that counterattack just decimated his villager count so badly, and as you said, Mista was distracted. He lost so many horsemen that could have been insanely valuable in that defense.
Critical, in fact. And now, while these man-at-arms will chase the spin back to base and force the villagers away, they're not doing anything. They're chasing an opponent away into his base where he's prepping crossbows to welcome you with open arms and open death. As they will definitely melt in the blink of an eye if there's enough crossbows here. So while Mista has started to pin his opponent in, I am a little bit concerned about whether he's going to have that power spike because he's waiting on Home Blades, but the difference is that Vortix won't be relying on it because he's keeping that composition going. It's not just a melee Zerg, it's going to be your range composite to support the effort as the spears and man-at-arms push forward.
A Relic is being brought in here by Mista. He feels that he's in trouble and he will try a Vololo. Nope. Nope. Big nope.
Well, nope. More like, yeah, it's just going to be a big fail. They'll just turn around, chase him away. I like how Mista's like, fine, just take the Relic. It was useless anyway. The formation shuffle really does just cripple you in these situations. Scholar is going to be butchered and stabbed down. Sacred Sight will end up in the next minute probably falling under control of Vortix. And the crossbows is just something that Mist is not ready for. Spears will deter the Lancers away. If we look in the base, is there any switch up? We're talking Castle Age, and yet we're not seeing any elephants. And we're also just not seeing the crossbows coming out because Mista still, even 17 minutes into the game, has not built an archery range.
And the problem is that now his unit composition is inferior. If he went into Castle Age before Vortix, and he actually did that, but he wasn't able to take any fights over there, he would have been in the possession of the men-at-arms, and Vortix didn't have a good answer to that in Feudal Age. He doesn't have crossbows, but getting into Castle Age, suddenly Vortix has a direct answer to that single unit that he's making, and of course Vortix also has a superior eco by a massive margin.
Man, this is starting to just feel like the game before the last one, the HRE one again, where Vortix is transitioning and Mista is just stubbornly sticking with what he has because he was ahead. Lance is trying to move through on the crossbows, but crossbows will disintegrate everything here. The Lancers, there's just not enough of them to scare off the crossbows. They'll back up, start a step back as they wipe out the cavalry, and in the meantime, the spears have kept the man-at-arms at bay long enough that now the crossbows can easily clean up the rest of this fight. And while that's happening, look what's wrapping in again. Vortix is like, you know what? I got a taste of villager blood last time I was here. I wonder if I can just sneak in a little nibble. These 4 horsemen round the back could easily poke down a bunch of these villagers with Mista not even noticing.
And Mista has no answer to those crossbows. That's the bigger problem. Not only is he losing that battle in the middle decisively, the problem is that there's just no sign for him making anything that's really a reasonable response to all those crossbowmen. And he must feel really bad about this one with all his villagers getting slain at the back. Because in that high view game, he actually went arbalestry and it failed so badly. And now he's just seeing his opponent pretty much going full crossbows and working out because he doesn't have a response to those crossbows right now. He's only making man-at-arms and knights.
Yeah, this really is just kind of a masterclass in experience, understanding the importance of transitioning, right? Vortix is kind of the mentor in this situation, but he's a mean mentor. He took that belt off, and now he's going to beat Mista to death with it because there is really no way to get out of your base anymore. The only thing he's got going for him, this Hail Mary in the north of gathering deer, is keeping him alive, but it is being drained fast, and it looks like it is going to be enough to convince Mista there is no point. He doesn't even attempt the transition. He taps out. Frustration might begin setting in as Vortix will now lead. 3-2 is the score. 2 games potentially remaining.
And honestly, I feel like this was the most important game here for the series because this was a game that Mista was very convenient in. He was very convincing in the beginning of the game. His strategy seemed to have worked, and everything was lined up for him to finish this game. So if he ends up losing this set, we'll be looking at this game as the one that probably should have been won for him because everything lined up so well. It was the same game plan as he used in the Mongols game, and it nearly worked to perfection, but that dramatic drop in the villager count just crippled him so much that by the time he recovered, Vortix was able to get to Castle Age and he just had no answer to those crossbows.
So to me, I think the big issue I'm seeing from Mister, and it's kind of a repeating pattern here, is like he has this element of complacency about his style. And I don't think that's as much like a criticism of him as it is a criticism of an old style of Age of Empires. If you think just a month ago, this whole idea that you don't transition when you're ahead was quite popular. You just zerged a unit, you forced your opponent to address it, and then you had time to like switch over yourself. But it feels like in these games, Vortex, because he's kind of honed this craft, because he understands how important it is to pivot unit types and counter out your opponents, he's already prepping ahead each time. While Mister is kind of almost being in this stubborn situation of having too many games played on previous patches where he's going, well, when I've done this like a month ago, this worked, right? Like I was ahead, he had to respond. I should have like had even fights and then been able to adapt. But instead, because of the way that Vortex is pivoting across these new unit types, he's taking a very clear and emphatic victory initially, and it means that there's no breathing room for Mister to then wiggle his way into a new unit type. I think Mister needs to stop thinking old school and think new school, right? Like new line of thinking is I know what is going to come. I should prep something that counters it now instead of waiting until I see it on my screen and it completely claps me to the floor. Because that has happened now at least twice in this series, and it has led to really brutal and demoralizing losses for Mister. And Vortex has to be fully aware of this weakness by now. He's now seen this multiple times. He's sniffed it out and he understands that when we go into this limited Civ games where you are going to need to transition still in the remaining matchups, he understands that because he's quicker to this, he can fully exploit it and just punish Mister for stubbornly sticking on one or two unit types.
And the alarming thing here for Mista at this point is that his last home map is going to be Lipany, which is an open map. And going back to the open maps, Vortex has won Arabia. Vortex has won the Highview game as well. So both of the open land map games that we've seen was won by Vortex. And in terms of civilizations, Mista is running out of those power civs. He's lost his French, he's lost his Rus, he's gone with the Delhi as well. And guess what? His opponent Vortix still has the Mongols available. We are coming into a Mongols versus Abbasid matchup on Lipany.
Yeah, that is chiefly concerning here. I was wondering when Vortex was going to whip this out. He actually likes to do this. I find Vortex kind of mixes it up, but on occasions where like it's a longer series, he tends to try and dangle Mongols out there as a looming threat because psychologically, there's so many maps that you think of as a player that Mongols are going to stomp you in. So you kind of double think your thought process of like, oh, maybe this is a half decent map for Abbasids. Oh, but he might pull out the Mongols. But now you've depleted so many civs and there's only a finite number of maps left, you know it's coming, and you don't necessarily have all the required counters. Abbasids could impress us. That is going to be do or die. Can he survive that? If he does, all of a sudden we maybe have a very interesting game. Otherwise, this is going to be a very cheesy and simple 10, 15 minute, it looks like it's done and dusted victory for Mongols that we're used to seeing all too frequently here.
Yeah, I agree with you on this one. The thing is that Mongols being a looming threat over there is just always lingering over those games because it makes you much more unpredictable. If you got Mongols used up, there are civilizations that are just much more straightforward for certain maps, so you can predict what your opponent is up to. Like, for example, as we discussed, Delhi being picked for Hillandale is basically an answer to the predictable HRE pick. And when you have the
Yeah.
Mongols over there, it's something that gives you that flexibility and unpredictability because you can pop it out any moment. So it's a little more difficult for your opponent to predict what exactly you're going to be picking.
Exactly. Like it's something that Vortex has understood a lot longer than most other players have when he got into these longer formats. You know, when you talked about him going in finals against these players and he was in the best of seven format, there were players who were willing to throw away civs in really weird conditions. Whereas usually he'd throw away a civ to get rid of a strong arm civ, whether it was Mongols, French, these types of civs, just removing them from the table and then holding onto his own later on, seeding the early map, but understanding like long term as you deplete map choices and deplete civ choices, that's when you can actually strike in a critical situation. Worst case scenario, you leave yourself with a cheap, easy game to take with these powerhouse civs. Best case scenario, you deal a decisive blow in a matchup on a map where your opponent should have had a good shot but was completely nullified in the beginning. So yeah, I think we're just about a minute out from this one beginning. For those just tuning in, right now the score is 3-2. Vortix is on match point. Mista, the fatigue might be setting in. This series is definitely going the mile. And Abasis is something I've got a question mark over. I need to see what he can deliver. I know this man likes horsemen. I think Abasis is definitely a civ you can get away with this doing. But what I want to see, because it feels like it's been a while since I've actually caught him doing it, is Vortex's Mongols. It used to be really spooky. I feel like he kind of leaned away from it. Maybe a lot of players just kind of got bored of spamming Mongols, but he still shows a clear and present danger when he mans this civ.
26 seconds remaining over here. The winner, if it is Vortix, he's going to get to the main event of N4C. If Mista wins this, we're going to game number 7. But whoever loses this set is going to have a chance to retry next week. But, you know, there is a lot of games to be played before you have the chance to qualify. So you want to minimize the risk of just falling out in the earlier rounds next week. So obviously, you're doing everything you can to qualify this weekend here.
Hey, man. Like, second qualifiers for losers. I said it first. Everyone else was thinking it. We're all about winners here. We're going to see if Mista can dial this one back. He's trailing as it stands. One game stands between Vortix and qualifying for the $100,000 LAN as we get underway on Lipany with Mongols versus Abbasids.
On the left side, we will have Vortix playing as the Mongols in blue. And down south, we are going to have the Abbasid dynasty coming in here for Mista. Abbasids did get buffed here with their berry gathering, and we've already seen Vortix trying to use Abbasids on an open map. But now we're going to have them face the Mongols here, and you gotta ask yourself the question, how many camel archers we could actually see over here, because as much as we have seen that from Vortix in the first game, we could see that from Mista in this one. We had a scout added from the town center by Vortix. This is going to help collecting sheep a tiny bit, whereas for Mista, it looks like he's only operating with one scout, as it seems.
Yeah, so like scout situation, Vortix already has that inherent edge already having a scout to begin with, right, in the Khan that's just much better. And it's not uncommon to go for the second one. I think as the Mongols, you do have the flexibility to play into pro scouts in some situations. We have seen a lot less of it, especially out of the Mongols compared to other civs that still do it occasionally. But if you do go into pro scouts, it's just going to be all yours. There's no real situation in which I see an Abbasid player playing pro scouts because the berry bushes are just so damn good. And it seems that the vegetarian life was pretty good back in the 14th century, if this is anything to go by. But we will see an opening of racks already just preemptively prepping himself for what he knows is likely coming, right? Vortix has two plays. When you're playing Mongols, you want to have military aggression in Dark Age to start with. It's either going to be you going for horsemen or you going for spears. Either way, this is the answer.
And you need to add those spears over here, because if you look at how the layout of the base is for Mista, his berries and the forest is very close to each other, so he really can't afford to get a tower in his face that's denying both of his berries and those wood lines, especially because the backup forest is also rather close to the first one. So in general, if a tower's aggression comes in from the right side, this could be very difficult to hold against, and he's going preemptively on the spearman, despite not seeing a single production building next to the Ovu. In fact, it makes me wonder if we're going to see this turned into an aggression here, as it very much seems like Vortix is not coming up with any kind of pressure, and he's just thinking about going into Feudal Age.
Yeah, I don't think like there's anything to be gained for him here. He understands that the racks have been dropped. The problem is whether you get rushed on the other side. I think something that we often forget about because we never see it anymore, but definitely I think most of us experienced it in team games in the opening weeks, is the fact that you can actually ram rush as the Abbasids in Dark Age. And if you don't have any military presence at all, I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Hail Marys on this.
Yeah, like I was thinking about that. That's really that do or die type of a build. Basically, I would basically call it a kamikaze build. Like Dark Age Rampush is extremely expensive, and you just got one shot at that. But honestly, it's possible Mista is gambling on that. But even if he isn't, that Ovo is wide open for burning, and this actually could be a nice window for Mista here, because at this point there is no army at all for Vortix, and that Ovo could just be burned down by the spears. Of course, the gold mines could also be harassed. Vortix is going to pull away the Gur, but he's not in Feudal Age yet, and that Ovu could be taken down.
He does have the required amount of gold, and he's ready to tech up now. As you said, Uvu's going to be attacked. And I think Vortix made this choice because of the way the Uvu is. It's not a good position to be aggressive with. It's not close enough to be economically viable. This Uvu just kind of exists in the game until a few minutes later. It's like possibly the worst type of spawn for a Mongol player. It's not well protected behind your base. It's not forward as a staging point. It's just off to the side as some weird kind of flappy extension on the primary. So looks like it might end up having to be sacrificed. Tech up is underway. This does mean that Vortix, like, he's not going to tap out. He doesn't think the game is done because of the fact that Mr. is invested in Spearmen like this and continues to slog them out. It does mean that Mr. hasn't left room to quickly tech up himself.
Yeah, I feel like now this is getting closer and closer to an all-in because you're seeing Mr. just continuously pumping out Spearmen, and even if he burns down the Ovu, he has to be aware that even just a couple of archers popping out for Vortix the moment he reaches Feudal Age is enough to win him the game, or at least just wipe out this entire army. But you gotta wonder what exactly Mist is planning over here. His resources aren't looking that terrible though. Look at that, that's the berry bonus that you're looking at from the Abbasids, and that is gonna be an Ovu burned down.
Yep, and no way that it can easily be protected. And they're not cheap, remember. The Uvus cost 150 wood. You missed that from your earlier game economy. It's pretty painful. And you know you're going to have to replace it at some stage just to get access to the military presence again. And it looks like Mr. hasn't just churned out non-stop spearmen. He did slowly push one or two extra, but he understands that actually, like, this amount of investment at this stage is good to get rid of the Uvu, to deny your opponent that hyper-aggression militarily at the start of Feudal. So if you just back off, maybe raid a little bit more, but don't like overinvest. Even if your opponent now counters you with archers, the important part is that the Mongol player is not going to be aggressive on your base. And it means you might even be able to access something greedy, like, say, a secondary TC.
That's an option, but I'm not necessarily a big fan of that. I get the feel that it might actually be better to just go for the full push in here, because as you see, Vortix doesn't have a single production building. You start adding archers here for Mista as you hit Feudal Age, and you already have the ability to make rams as you get to Feudal with the blacksmith. In fact, you can already make rams in Dark Age. So you could technically turn this into a very aggressive Abbasid play and punish the fact that Vortix is not making a single military unit right now.
But Mr. says, la 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 la, can't hear you, as 5 villagers are working on stone right now. And there's a good reason behind this. It's the same reason we don't see these Dark Age ram rushes anymore, is if you do rush in with just spears protecting this ram, these villagers will burn it to the ground. And your spearmen don't kill villagers that quickly, right? And you don't have many spearmen. You know your opponent already has an archery range. Like, it feels like it's such a hard strategy to pull off. I think you have like a 30-second window where ram rush makes sense, but it's like finding that initial influx of wood in your eco is tough. And if you even just invest in a House of Wisdom, it almost feels like that option immediately evaporates and you just have to play towards the later timing. So I'm quite glad that Mr. didn't go into the Ram Rush. I feel like one Ram wouldn't be good enough to end this game, at least not for Vortix. It probably would have ended it in favor of Vortix.
Yeah, I think that at this point, Mista, like, his only tools to make a Ram Rush happen would have been to add archers in here. He was mining stone, and Vortix is aware of this one, and now Vortix has had an archer range that's actually very convenient over right next to the town center on the left side. It's gonna be pastured as well, and now we're seeing archers trickling through the map, all hidden in that stealth forest, so Mistas might not actually spot them, and they could just pop out of the shadows. Mista doesn't have any tools to stop archers right now, and those lumberjacks are dangerously exposed.
He's prepping it, though. Double stable now being dropped. He's not going to waste any time. He understands that he needs to have the critical mass of horsemen to push Vortix back. And with Vortix already now flaunting those archers in his face, he knows he's got maybe a minute max before he has to have a defense force in place.
Indeed, Vortix doesn't have a single spearman on the battlefield, and Mista going for the double stable horseman double town center build of the Abbasids. That's just a pretty common way of playing Abbasids. In fact, a build that Vortix pioneered some time ago. But of course, Vortix is increasing his army numbers, and we're seeing barracks being added. And the Mongol infantry flood is likely about to begin, because there's just a ton of stone in the bank right now for Vortix, so he can really flood out those spearmen and archers.
Yeah, and this is like the only Civ that can do this opening, by the way. The Abbasids probably, I think that's a fair statement. They're the only ones that can do double stable and double TC at 8 minutes in. The reason being is because of fresh foodstuffs, which is now being researched. All of a sudden, you're not paying additional for these villages. You made the investment in a TC, and now you're spending 25 food in each of these, which means you have that additional food income to push into horsemen, which became even more affordable and even earlier point for Abbasids ever since those berry bushes got buffed for the gather rates and the capacity you carry back to the mill.
Exactly. The berry bonus gives you a tremendous amount of food income, and that just allows you to facilitate that double town center villager production alongside the stables. And of course, you only pay one villager's cost for two with the fresh foodstuffs upgrade, but still, you need to be able to maintain production on both town centers and potentially both stables as well. That requires a lot of food, and the berry bonus helps a lot with that.
Or I'll teach you a better way to say it, Lidakor. You buy one, you get one free. Say it with me. You buy one, you get one free.
You
Does that not sound good?
sell one, and you get three for two.
Oh, sorry. I realized we're in RTS land. Let me put it more in RTS form. You get more work. Pretty good, right? You get more work. That's all that matters here. And you don't pay more for it. You get that floating economy. It's going to be important that he protects himself, though. Like you said, Vortix is going to try and ramp up here. But it looks like actually Vortix is ramping up in a different way. Look at those eco numbers. The sheep game is strong in this boy. Free pastures at the ready, churning out the sheepies, ready to be butchered and churned into the grinding eco of the Mongol player as he's prepping for a castle age boom.
Not only is he prepping for Castle Age, he's running towards those villagers on the right side. Now, Mista is going to spot those archers coming in, but one thing that Mista doesn't really have is numbers. He's at 8 army right now. Some of that are still spearmen, I believe, and now he's adding triple archer ranges. I get the feel that by the time he starts adding those archers and potentially the horsemen, his opponent is just gonna get to Castle Age, as you said.
Yeah, he's just vibing right now. Vortex is like, this is really cut and dry. I mean, like, is Mister gonna come back and pressure me? He burnt one Uvu. And like, it's almost like kind of like that feeling of, haha, the Mongols have lost their Uvu. They suck now. No. They're still very economically strong. And in the next 2 or 3 minutes, Mister, you're going to learn that the hard way.
The
Really hard.
puzzling thing is that Mista has scouted the area where that other stone mine is at, so he's aware of that stone mine. So, like, even after destroying that Ovu, since he hasn't been pressuring his opponent for a long time, it should be obvious that Ovu was rebuilt. Obviously, it's going to slow down Vortix a tiny bit, but Mista is also slowed down quite considerably. I mean, 2 town centers, 2 stables, and 3 archer ranges worth of production is a gigantic amount of investment.
And there's the depressing news. Castle Age reached. Mister still struggling on the gold and barely has anyone working at it. He's trying to fix that now. But this fixation on military presence early leaves him heavily exposed. Vortix already prepping to push up, but he's not even going to wait. He actually calls it. He doesn't even look to fight. I don't know if it's that fatigue we were talking about, but Mister has had enough of this qualifier. He will call GG, and Vortix will be the 3rd player to qualify for N4C.
And if you just look back at that Hill and Dale game, we talked about how mentally depleting that is. You look back at the Highview game, and you just see the desperation creep in. Like, with this Abbasid dynasty, obviously this is a tough civilization matchup for them, but this was the first time in this entire set where Mista didn't feel like he had a good game plan going into this one. And this entire game just tells me that he was just trying to scramble for something and realized it's not gonna work. Vortix killed 4 units, Mista didn't kill a single unit in this game, and I'm not going to say that Mista went into this game cluelessly, but it really felt like he didn't really have a ton of options left with the Abbasids against Mongols here, and that's where we're looking back at the 2 games where things were looking good for him for a long time, but in the end, Vortix was able to close those out.
Yeah, I think the more kind of weirdly highlightable thing is, if you remember what I was criticizing Mister for in previous games, it was the fact that he wasn't diversifying his army enough. The weird part about this game is it's almost like he's like, I hear you, Pidge. I know where you're coming from. Don't worry, mate. I got this one. Drops all 3 types of military production buildings in mass, right? What was that? There was a racks. Oh, actually, it was escalation the whole way through. Starts with 1 racks, gets 2 stables, then gets 3 archery ranges. And it feels like you've just like, I've got all these military buildings, but no tech, right? It's almost just this weird overcompensation. It's almost like he understood exactly why, and he should, he's a talented player, why he lost the 3rd and the 5th game, and then over calibrates in the 6th game, realizing like, oh no, Vortix is going to do it to me again. He's going to have 3 unit types. He's going to outcomp me. He's going to transition past, and then I'm in trouble. Instead, he gets the bad news that Vortix has no intent of doing that. He just takes up. He's like, this is so simple. I mean, I played him like a fiddle. He's in for a penny, in for a pound now, never getting out of feudal. And I feel like at that stage, the frustration has just boiled over. I wouldn't be surprised if a little bit this was tilt. Mista, like you said before, he doesn't like these long series. He tends to get fatigued, a little bit drained. And I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of set in. Like he's beating himself up over game 3 and 5. He comes into game 6. He understands what he done wrong in game 3 and 5. Probably still thinking about it a little bit too much. Overbuilds in the feudal, and all of a sudden looks like a headless chicken in the fog lights of Vortix's truck that runs him down.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chad has been saying some very interesting things over here because one thing that we're noticing if you look at the villager graph is that there's a minimal discrepancy. It really feels like Mista may have even stopped or didn't even start making villagers in that second town center because there is
Oh
no
wow.
way that he was just like 3 or 4 villagers at that time. It's just not gonna work. And as I said, the thing here is that this was the game where it really didn't feel like Mista had a good game plan going into this one, as if his entire strategy was built upon the fact that, okay, I'm trying to avoid the scenario of fighting against Mongols and Abbasids, or like maybe he looked at this set and said, okay, I'm just going to use up my Abbasids against his Mongols simply because I will just sort of acknowledge that I will lose the game and I will win the rest. The problem is that he didn't win the rest, and by the time the Mongols were picked, he sort of was just left with the Abbasids, and that's why, as you said, that looming presence of the Mongols is just so dangerous. If Mongols was used in the first game and Mr. just went, let's say, Abbasids, he might just say, okay, whatever, I'm gonna try my best with Abbasids here, but I know that I'm just sort of giving away a weak civilization for a powerful from my opponent. But here, you just
Yeah.
couldn't afford to give this game away anymore.
And this is the experience of playing RCSs for years, really bleeding through for Vortex at a high competitive level. Like, he understands that this game in a long series isn't actually decided simply by who wins each individual game. It's the drafting strategy. Draft is such a big element. I'm a bit of a nerd for it because I come from like a MOBA background, and draft is key there, right? Like, what heroes do we pick? How do we counter this out? But it's the same in this situation. I think it's very easy to get mixed up in an individual game and talk about the counters like spearman beats horse, all this other crap. But when you look at it from a wider picture and you match up the maps and you match up the civs, I think something that actually Vortex has been phenomenal at doing, even months ago, last year, in fact, was understanding that when these series do go long, when you're talking BO5s and BO7s, there's a whole new layer to the game. You're not playing an Age of Empires 4 match anymore. You're playing AoE 4, the grand strategy game. And that requires some big brain thinking where you take a step back and assess what you can do to your opponent. And one thing that Vortex has been doing for a long time in these longer bouts is dragging the Mongols out, just kind of looming it there, waving it above you, teasing you, saying, I might pick this now. And it's always in the forethought of your mind because Mongols has been easily the single most oppressive civ consistently from release up to present.